Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
The men of the Night's Watch have been quite restless in recent days, as Lord Commander Mormont received reports from the south, with a number of men coming north to search for Artica. He didn't know what to think, as the king demanded men from the order to accompany the troops going beyond the wall, which was a bad thing. But he also couldn't say it was bad. After all, with the troops, new prisoners to enter the order with food and resources coming from the great houses to help the wall. Although it is something unique, after all, they finally called for the Night's Watch. Commander Mormont could not help but comment internally, since he never received much help from the south, while only the northern houses did that. But things were not very lively among his men, with everyone knowing that there is a fleet of 200 ships beyond the wall, with an army capable of devastating one of the main cities of the Seven Kingdoms and destroying many more ships than the Ironborn could destroy in their rebellion, putting the Seven Kingdoms in a difficult position. Jeor Mormont knew that these more than 10,000 men starting to be brought to the north were men fated to die, and he had no choice but to send some rangers to share their same fate. He could not stop thinking that these men serving the watch was a much better option, and they needed it at this moment. After all, the wildlings were getting desperate to come south. Mormont did not know why, but it did not seem that Ned's son was the reason for those men's fear. He tried to find Artica many times with requests to try to find Arya since she left, and as he also felt responsible for the girl passing through the wall under his nose, he sent some men, but the wildlings never let them go far beyond the initial region, which made them never find this mysterious place. Many believe it does not exist, but John Artica did not pull all that out of nowhere. He has an army, ships, resources impossible to get in these wildlands, and he is sure that more and more wildlings are joining him. Jeor did not fail to look out the window as he saw his men having cautious glances as he was going to patrol, while a group entered the elevator to go up from the wall. They went up until they finally arrived with some men already on standby looking at nothing, while they wondered if it would be another boring day freezing their balls on this frozen wall. The first rays of sun began to appear, while a cloud was on the wall, but there was still a view from the bottom with everything calm, without any movement, even from the animals. "Hey, Jiff," a man from the patrol called one of the new men coming up. "You have a worried face. Are you afraid of encountering the army of giants coming to knock down the wall today?" He mocked. "Shut up, idiot," Jiff muttered. "They can't knock down the wall." The man spoke despite not sounding so confident in his tone. "Don't worry, Jiff. The South is sending 100,000 men, from what I've heard. They're going to destroy the wildlings." This man showed his teeth as he laughed, with some of them missing. "You say that because you didn't see the Articans who came here a few years ago. You would shit yourself with fear if that were the case." Jiff spoke cautiously. "I've been here only 2 years, so I haven't seen, but I've heard good things. Some guys said they're thinking of running away, because now the wildlings live a much better life than the nobles below the wall, believe it? I wouldn't mind sleeping in a warm bed fucking a wildling every day." He spoke. "You talk of betrayal. Have you forgotten our vows?" Jiff mocked. "Fuck our vows, Jiff. You need to—" He was going to continue, but was interrupted. "Shut up," Jiff exclaimed urgently. "HM? What now?" The man did not stop mocking even more. "Just be quiet," Jiff growled. "Aren't you listening?" He spoke, making the man about to curse look quiet while trying to use his ears for whatever Jiff was listening to. So they began to hear a sound of wind beating, wondering where it came from, with a low cloud over the wall that morning obstructing their view. "What is that? A giant bird or something?" The man murmured skeptically, looking up. "We can't see with this cloud," Jiff murmured as the sound grew louder than ever. "Is it here?" the man exclaimed, scared as he felt something pass over them, and it was immense, seeing a shadow passing by. Aragon passed close to the wall quickly while heading south, hiding in the middle of the cloud there. As he entered the present territory, he began to gain altitude as the clouds began to lessen, and he rose in the air to not attract too much attention, flying just 200 meters from the ground, changing that altitude to 10,000 feet from the ground. Jon followed with a firm gaze, beginning to pass by Last Hearth, the House of the Umbers, as it appeared just a small structure in the middle of that land, with a town connected to the castle. Further south, Aragon passed over the lake in the middle of the north, continuing towards the heart of the north. Jon, mounted on his back, had no other desire but to head for Winterfell, which no longer seemed so far away, with the castle beginning to appear as a small dot on the horizon with Wintertown. That morning, Ned took the only time in his day where he could be more at ease as he went to the main hall of Winterfell to eat with his family, while his children all ate quietly, his wife also not talking much at this moment. He looked at her for a moment, as both no longer even seemed to feel the love they had for each other, while Catelyn turned her face as she lay in bed as far from Ned as possible without wanting his touch, after their endless fights every day. Everything seemed calm as he prepared for another day, but he knew it would not remain calm, due to all the organization from the south sending thousands of soldiers to the north, with him having to keep in touch with the Night's Watch and the noble houses. Ned also had to answer his friend and his foster father because he refused to send soldiers beyond the wall. And even with the dissatisfaction of Robert and Jon Arryn, Ned refused to send forces to hunt his sons. He stayed in the Solar until mid-morning, while his door suddenly opened. Lord Stark, Jory Castle, opened the door at this moment as Ned set his scroll aside. "Yes," he asked. "There's been an occurrence in the courtyard. Ser Roderick said your sons are fighting," he said, and Ned raised an eyebrow before beginning to rise to see what was happening. He went out with his guard and headed straight to the courtyard, arriving there, while seeing Ser Roderick speaking with Theon and Robb, with a quite severe tone, as Bran held his arm that seemed injured, while he saw his daughter Sansa looking distant with her friends. "What is happening here?" he quickly demanded as he approached. "Just a bit hotter battle than usual, Lord Stark," Theon said as he seemed a bit cautious. But Bran exclaimed at that moment angrily. "You were provoking me by speaking ill of Jon," he said as he returned to his father with a somewhat lost look. "He just keeps talking bad about Jon. Says Jon is a bastard criminal and cruel, provoking me all the time. Robb might act sometimes, but doesn't seem to care most of the time." Ned heard his son speak. He raised an eyebrow, scanning his gaze from his son to Theon. "Is that true?" He looked at the children, as Theon lowered his head in shame, but Robb seemed quite stubborn. "Isn't it true?" he questioned Ned. "Is that what you think?" Ned asked, a bit surprised. "Didn't he attack a city in the south and kill unarmed Septons, Maesters? Didn't he destroy thousands of ships with thousands of lives being destroyed?" Robb openly questioned his father. "You may think so, but I don't believe Jon did it by chance. After all, he had peaceful dealings with Dorne and the Reach before initiating the attack. So things may not be exactly as we hear from the south," Ned spoke. But Robb didn't seem convinced at all, so he just sighed. "I wanted to go to class with Maester Luwin. You also need to have that injury looked at, understand?" he said at the end, as the three began to walk towards the castle. Ser Roderick, seeing this, looked to his lord alongside his nephew, Jory. "There's a lot of jealousy and anger among the children." "I know, but Robb has to learn that he can't be like Jon. I can understand the envy Robb harbors for Jon. After all, Jon at the same age is known throughout the kingdom, but he should at least be grateful. After all, Jon won't do anything his mother said. Jon has his own kingdom and doesn't want Winterfell. He even helped this house the last time he was here." Ned spoke. "But Robb continues to fear Jon. Theon always tells him that Jon will take Winterfell in the future and he won't be able to do anything about it." Ser Roderick spoke while Ned frowned at this. "I'll have a serious talk with Theon then and ask why his interest in undermining the relationship of my sons." Ned spoke in a serious tone. Ned was ready to return to the castle after that, along with his guard as he bid farewell to Roderick. However, he heard a strong sound coming and everyone immediately looked back above the castle. However, what no one expected was a snow explosion emerging at that moment. Ned quickly opened his eyes while he swore he saw a giant creature flying, bringing that storm that caught them the next second, covering all visibility of the morning. Immediately, Screams were heard all over the place, with the snow beginning to expand, as the sun was obscured by that strange phenomenon covering Winterfell. "What is this?" Ser Roderick exclaimed in fear. "Where did this come from?" Jory, next to Ned, exclaimed as the guards training in the training yard began to run by their side to anywhere with the intention of protecting themselves, while shouting, wondering what was happening there. Ned, quickly with his hands protecting his face and seeing the situation, exclaimed, "Take everyone to a safe place. A snowstorm has hit us. Find a safe place until it passes and light any fire to warm up." He gave his orders despite not understanding where it was coming from. Snowstorms were quite rare in the middle of summer, but that wasn't even the strangest part, as nothing indicated something like this coming, while the morning only appeared with a few clouds in the sky. People all over the castle began to get scared at this moment, while the more fortunate were inside the castle, like most of the servants, with Ned's children there, as Sansa quickly entered with her friends near the entrance, and Catelyn was trapped inside the September, looking scared at the windows of the temple along with the septa. "For the seven, what is this?" Catelyn exclaimed in fear, never having seen something like this since she came to Winterfell. "Quick, we need to pray," Septa Mordain immediately exclaimed. "But my children," she exclaimed. "They'll be fine, just pray." The septa insisted, and Cat did exactly that. People ran all over the place, taking shelter anywhere, with shadows running back and forth within all that snow, hitting their faces, and many starting to feel the enormous cold, due to not being prepared for something like this, and the snow piled up on the ground covering any land there. Meanwhile, the people of Wintertown were outside of it in the town, but they all looked scared, seeing the entire castle suddenly envelop in a white snow hurricane around it, spinning at high speed, wondering what was happening there, even questioning if the old gods were enraged with the Starks. As Ned ran and began to enter the castle, he suddenly felt something land in the middle of the courtyard, with everything shaking a bit. "What was that?" he murmured next to Jory, looking back, but without visibility due to the strong wind and the snow accumulating all over the place. Jory raised his sword, looking fearfully at the snow as he trembled. "Jory, go inside. You could die of hypothermia," Ned exclaimed, noting the man was beginning to turn blue, as he wasn't wearing warm clothes. Jory, somewhat reluctant, eventually obeyed after a stern look from Ned. Ned, accustomed to wearing a cloak even in the middle of summer, managed to withstand the icy wind better along with his Stark blood. He saw people running back and forth, returning inside, shouting almost incomprehensible things due to the sound of the event. Then, in the midst of the darkness, as he approached the sound coming from the middle of the courtyard, he saw someone walking, someone he recognized the moment he saw him, staring dazedly. "John," Ned murmured, seeing his nephew walking calmly through that chaos as if he were a ghost. Ned immediately gave up on the courtyard and began to run after him, wondering if it was some kind of illusion. John had only one thing on his mind since he had found out who his real mother was. He quickly created a storm explosion as he approached the castle, while Aragon began to glow. His dragon created a snowstorm much more powerful than the one he had made at the Great Weirwood, quickly covering the entire castle, making the whole place darken into shadow and ice. Then, without a second thought, after flying over the area a bit and landing in the courtyard, he dismounted from Aragon and went straight to the crypts with a desire to see his mother as she truly was and not as an aunt who died unjustly. He quickly entered the crypt as if all the sound and chaos outside had disappeared, giving way to the sinister silence he still remembered having when entering this place. It didn't take him long to find her. After all, the old generation of Starks had been buried on the first floor. As he walked up to her statue, Lyanna Stark, John stopped and looked at it for a few moments, and couldn't help but feel tears coming out of his eyes at this moment as he stared at the statue, wondering if it really was molded to be, with her emerald eyes looking at him hypnotically. He stared at her, remembering the horrible days here in this castle, the days when he cried like a lost child, seeking the warmth of his unknown mother, but only hunger and cold were the answer almost every day. "You were here all along, and I never greeted you, Mother," he murmured with a voice laden with sadness. It's so good to see you and recognize you now. He began as tears fell like a waterfall. Once he had told his then father that he no longer wanted to know who his mother was, that he had given up, but knowing, being in front of her grave, he couldn't help but have his feelings overflowing. I wish you were here to see what I've become, what I've built beyond the wall. I wonder if you would be proud of me. Jon murmured, as tears streamed from his eyes and filled a small puddle at his feet. He heard footsteps coming at this moment, and the sadness quickly turned to anger, knowing his uncle was following him, one of the last people he wanted to see at this moment, interrupting his only and first moment he had with his true mother. Ned descended the stairs of the crypt and saw Jon in the distance with a torch in his hand. He seemed quite scared of everything here, wondering what was happening and if it really was Jon there, and how he ended up here in the midst of this chaos. There were so many questions in his mind, but seeing him in front of Lyanna's statue as he saw some tears falling made him even more cautious. You always avoided talking much about her, Jon began, while Ned furrowed his brow just a few meters from him. I never found that strange. I thought it was a wound from your past. After all, no one would like to talk about a sister who died after such a tragic end. Ned looked carefully, but couldn't utter a word as his son continued. But now I understand what you were trying to hide. Hide that my life was a lie as far back as I can remember, that my mother, whom you always denied telling me about, was buried here all along. Wasn't she, Uncle Ned? Jon said, expressing his anger even as he spoke slowly. How did you find out? Ned was staggered at this moment, trying to comprehend how Jon had discovered such a thing, a secret he intended to take to his grave. He didn't even bother to deny it upon hearing all this from Jon. When I attacked the Citadel, I looted many books, and among them was the personal diary of the Septon who died in the sack of King's Landing. He wrote that he had annulled the marriage of Elia of House Martell with Rhaegar Targaryen, and after that, he married the prince to Lyanna of House Stark, naming her Lyanna Targaryen, future Queen of the Realm. Jon said, as Ned, thinking he could not be more shocked, looked at Jon with his mouth and eyes slightly open. Jon saw no response from his uncle and continued. Funny, isn't it? I always had some suspicion, but never really investigated, always avoided that possibility. Jon knew he had something to do with the Targaryens when he had a kind of bond with those he encountered on his path. Why I discovered this, my first thought was that I am a Targaryen bastard, but in fact, I am a legitimate son and even heir to the Iron Throne as my birthright. Funny that, isn't it, Eddard Stark? Jon spoke, not even looking at his uncle behind him. I wonder what name she gave me. The diary said that Rhaegar wanted me to be Visenya if I were born a woman, but my mother was uncertain about many names. He said in a calm tone, but still overflowing with anger. Aegon. Ned spoke suddenly for the first time, as Jon just listened. Aegon Targaryen. She named you that, although she didn't know you were a legitimate son. Ned had to admit there was no more hiding it. Aegon Targaryen. Jon murmured, but still with his gaze fixed on his mother, ignoring his uncle. Jon! Ned started to approach him, and, as soon as he touched his shoulder, Jon quickly turned around, grabbing his hand, tightly causing Ned pain, and before he could react, his neck was gripped by Jon's other hand and started to be pulled back. Don't touch me, you bastard! Jon immediately growled, walking with his hand on his uncle's neck to the other side of the wall, strangling him strongly. Being able to easily lift him with his strength, Jon continued to look at Ned with almost hatred. You lied to me all my life. I was condemned to a life of ostracism by your wife and everyone in this castle, thanks to your lie. And even if you wanted to hide me, you could have placed me in another house, but you kept me here even knowing what I went through within these walls. Jon growled as Ned struggled to breathe, looking fearfully at Jon. If I did that, it was to protect you. Ned spoke with difficulty, as Jon looked at him mockingly. No, you didn't. You did it on purpose to see me suffer. You knew very well many things that happened to me. You did exactly what you expected would happen. Maybe it's out of anger for my parents, I don't know. But you took pleasure in seeing me, a child, suffer, Lord Stark. Jon growled with a rage he had never felt before, much less for the man he thought was his father. That's not true. I never wanted any harm for you. I always wanted to protect you. Ned spoke with difficulty, trying to deny it, while Jon was hanging by a thread from exploding that man's head while he released the hand he had caught earlier and punched the wall next to Ned's head, causing the stones to immediately crack, with the man becoming even more frightened by the strength of his nephew. You seem not to understand what happened in this place, but let me refresh your memory, Uncle Ned. Jon began, as he had strained to divert that punch to not hit his uncle's head. I was persecuted by your wife the entire time. She turned all the staff in this house against me. I had the worst room, the worst food, the worst clothing. I lived worse than the servants. And you seem like a fool who didn't even know about it. Or, as I said, you seem to take pleasure in seeing me in that state. Jon growled. Then your beloved wife started to get even worse. Seemingly not satisfied with just making a child suffer, she began to blame me. Everything your son, the heir, did wrong with that fish, I was your scapegoat. The last mess that my name circulated in this castle was about her accusing me of that theft that forced me to confess that I was, while your son and that squid had done the entire crime. The damn wife was even threatening to cut off my hand. And believe me, Lord Stark, I rethink it every day in Artica about 10 times before deciding to send tens of thousands of Artican soldiers to march to this castle and turn it into ruins to hunt down all those who conspired against me. And now I must think 1,000 times before doing that, discovering that not even your cruelties are justifiable. He spoke each word growling like a true dragon, making Ned even start to lose the color of his skin, with his consciousness beginning to fade. He looked at his nephew, not knowing what to say to that, but was finally released as Jon simply grabbed him and threw him to the side, making him fall several meters, rolling across the crypt floor. Jon looked one last time at the statue of his mother. "Sorry you had to see this," he murmured, "but your brother made me live through all this." After that, he started to leave through the crypt stairs, leaving his uncle behind before he did something foolish. Ned, still all bruised and coughing with lack of air, saw Jon leaving and quickly started to get up. "Wait, Jon," he shouted as he followed down the stairs. He quickly left the crypt, still with the snowstorm covering all of Winterfell, and quickly tried to look for his nephew amid that chaos, until he saw his shadow moving towards the courtyard while disappearing and started to run after him. "Wait, Jon, talk to me," he pleaded desperately, trying to have a chance to speak after hearing all that. However, as they approached where Jon was, 2 blue eyes began to emerge from the middle of the snow as they began to rise, forming the figure of a huge head, but without Ned saying what that thing was. This immediately made Ned stop walking as his feet hit the accumulated snow on the ground, making him falter backward instead of continuing to follow. The blue eyes in the middle of that snow seemed to stare at him furiously, making Ned ask, "What is that?" The eyes were at least 20 meters off the ground, staring at Ned, until suddenly they moved a little forward instantly and a huge roar emerged from the snow, making it all advance towards Ned, who exclaimed in fright, falling backward as the entire sound of the roar made all of Winterfell tremble and desperate screams being heard on all sides in fear of that sound. What was that? Even the people of Wintertown, outside that snow hurricane, looked frightened at the sound of a monster emerging there in the midst of the white hurricane. Ned fell to the ground while looking scared, seeing 2 huge shadows, like wings, rising before lowering, with a huge creature beginning to fly into the sky, only seeing its shadow, but keeping his gaze mesmerized at that, while the storm finally began to calm down. Ned did not know how long he stayed there, still looking at where the creature had left, but finally the sun began to rise again, and the people of Winterfell began to come out of their hideouts, looking at all the snow accumulated around the castle, until some guards saw their lord there, frozen on the ground, looking up as they approached to help him try to talk to him. But Ned did not hear anyone, having his own thoughts about what he had just seen. Arctic was finally spotted after a few hours, as Jon flew north again, unnoticed since he left Winterfell. Jon entered the city silently, but everyone saw the dragon flying over the city while wondering what had happened earlier with the confusion in the morning, where no one could say who it was and why the king had disappeared flying out of the kingdom while returning in the middle of the day again. Aragon was circling the Grand Weirwood, looking a bit hesitant with his gaze toward the castle. But, quickly, Jon moved his dragon downward as he approached and landed calmly in the castle courtyard. It was no surprise as Serena approached, her hand on her belly, looking at Jon with concern. Arya was with her, accompanied by guards, while Ygritte stood at the bedroom window looking out. Since she couldn't move much, being the most affected by the pregnancy, Jon could see her worried look toward him too. Jon sighed. He still had his book in his clothes and dismounted from Aragon, landing on the ground, before looking at his dragon, which began to take off with a mental command. He was quickly greeted by the women. "Jon, are you all right?" "What was that?" she asked cautiously. "Where did you go? You've never left Arctic with Aragon, and what was all that snow about?" Arya also came closer, asking curiously. "I had to sort out some things in the south." Jon spoke, but not wanting to talk much about it here. He saw Serena and Arya looking at him. "We will talk about this in private," Jon finally said, giving Arya a glance, looking at him suspiciously. She was no longer his sister, which made him think about his true sister, the one he had lain with and taken her virginity. He wondered what she would do if she knew he was her brother by their father and that Lyanna was his mother, wondering if she would blame him for the disgrace that happened in their family. Jon soon pushed that thought aside, thinking it would be a problem to deal with another time, and walked up to Serena, giving her a kiss on the forehead, as the girl looked at him suspiciously, clearly not pleased about him disappearing all morning and returning at midday. "Let's go inside. I need to tell you something," he said, and turned back to Arya, still looking at him intently. "Can I talk to you later, Arya?" "It's important," Jon said. While the girl remained dissatisfied, he accompanied his wife to the room where Ygritte was quickly questioning them, but Jon took out the book and sat on the bed, asking his wives to join him, then began to tell everything he had discovered thanks to that book, telling his true origin and how his life was different from what he imagined. "So you're saying you are a son of an ancient king from the south?" Ygritte said with a tone more surprised than intended. "And that you are heir to that southern throne where southerners would kill to sit," she said, looking at him cautiously. "Yes," Jon murmured. "So, that means Nyra is your sister," Serena commented, while Ygritte grimaced at that. Jon just nodded, sighing. He knew the people might not react well to learning he was sleeping with his own sister, but he couldn't change the past. In fact, he felt even more guilt knowing he still loved that girl in Dorne, and the first thing he wanted to do was to take her away from there and bring her to him as quickly as possible. "What do you plan to do, Jon?" Serena asked, worried, knowing this could change many of their plans, but Jon shook his head. "As much as this is surprising and almost drives me mad to the point of almost having killed my uncle a few hours ago, or that I have a right to that throne, I'm not interested. I have Arctic and you all, something I must continue to take care of. I will continue with the plans I have as usual and focus on this country that the old gods guided me to build. And the most important thing in this world is the war against those who want the destruction of humanity, and it will happen here, and I have no time to deal with a chair in the south, full of arrogant nobles who I honestly feel like strangling half of them," Jon said. He could not simply worry about the south, even if he was the legitimate heir. "Well, now we know how you deal with many things. This explains your relationship with the dragons." Serena smiled, seeing that her husband would not abandon Arctic to pursue his rights. "And Arya?" Ygritte asked. Jon thought about how he would explain this mess to his sister or cousin at this moment. "I'll talk to her later. For now, I just want to rest a bit. I need to sleep after all this," he said, just wanting to lie down and try to forget for a few hours everything that had happened from the moment he opened this book until his return from a break here. The wives ended up accompanying him, and he slept for about 4 or 5 hours until he woke up again to have a meal, while his women accompanied him the whole time. It did not take long for him to go to the sacred grove to meet Bryn Din and Aemon, before placing the book in front of them. "So that's why there was this commotion this morning," Bryn Din murmured, reading the documents about his parents' marriage and how Jon was the heir to the 7 kingdoms. Aemon remained silent, but still maintained a surprised look. "As you can see, it seems we are relatives, but something tells me now that you already knew this." Jon looked hawkishly at them. "Yes, even if you have the powers you do, It's not easy for someone to simply bond with a dragon like you did. Moreover, the absence of your mother's name, plus the gap that you could be Lyanna Stark's son, was evident, Brynden said. I always knew that Rhaegar would never kidnap or rape a woman, but I am surprised and very happy that you are a legitimate son, heir to the Iron Throne. Aemon commented with a melancholic tone. However, you never thought to talk to me about this, Jon accused with a tone of dissatisfaction, ignoring the last part from Aemon. We wanted to tell you when you reached 18 years old, or if Arctic was quite established. After all, we did not know how this might affect you, Brainer confessed. And now, boy, what do you wish to be? Aemon asked with a curious tone. I am what I am, and will always continue to be, until the end of my days, Jon said firmly. He was no longer a Snow, a bastard son living in misery in Winterfell. He would not be a Stark, and he would not be a Targaryen. He was what he built, what he would leave in his legacy. A legacy, what he did with the chance the gods gave him. This city, this kingdom, with the intention of fighting against the darkness that approached and threatened all of humanity. He was Jon Arctic, and no one else, no matter who his father was, or what he would inherit with his parents' names. I am glad you choose this, my boy. You will be the best of us all. You achieved something greater than Aegon when he came to Westeros with his sisters, Aemon said with a melancholic tone, but had a gleam in his eye the next moment. And what will you do about your sister in the south? And I must remind you that there are also Riella's children hidden in Essos. He murmured, waiting for Jon's response. He talked about Rhaenys and Dorne and how Aemon was happy to hear that a daughter of Elia survived last week. I know it's just complicated. I don't know how she will react towards me when she finds out I am Lyanna's son and her father, Jon murmured, wondering what the girl's reaction would be. Brynden looked narrowly. You slept with her, didn't you? He said, knowing how to read someone when it came to sleeping with another person, as Jon nodded. Yes, I didn't know we were related, but something connected us and we ended up spending a night together, Jon admitted. Do you love her? Aemon suddenly asked. Jon ended up thinking a bit with this question, wondering if the feeling was merely carnal or if he truly loved her. There was passion, though he didn't think love was something created in just a few weeks. Jon certainly felt a passion and connection with that girl. Yes, he replied, confirming that he loved her. Well, then that's not a problem, Aemon said. The Targaryens always married brothers to sisters, he mentioned. And Arctic, would she accept this? Jon couldn't help but ask. Like it or not, he also had to worry about public opinion, and his counselors were better at giving him advice. You built a kingdom for them. You took them from a miserable life to bring them here. Everyone sees that you are blessed by the old gods, my boy. No one will dare to say anything against you. Besides, knowing your story, the story of your family, the Targaryens, it won't be as uncommon as you think. Aemon spoke, and Jon nodded. It's good that our family didn't completely die out, my boy. Aemon continued to speak. It makes this old man remember having dead hopes before meeting you, and you changed all that. You are your father's son, and the one who will lead the family from here on. And even if you choose not to want the Iron Throne, or even to dominate the South, you are grand, greater than any other. Remember that, he finished. Yes, Uncle Aemon, Jon spoke with a small smile. And we will rescue our family, he said with the intention of seeking out the others. We'll get the uncles from Essos and Nyra from Dorne, he said with a firm tone. Aemon approached Jon as he accepted a warm hug from the older man. But the next moment, he felt something while hearing a strong howl coming from the castle and another from the sky. They're being born, Jon immediately exclaimed and left Brynden behind as he headed for the entrance of the grove, while Aragorn landed right there. Jon took off with his dragon and quickly went to the castle, landing at the entrance and running inside. How are they? He asked the first person who came to greet them. My king. Both exclaimed that the water broke and all the midwives in the castle are running to the room and are preparing them for the birth. The royal guard gave his report as Jon nodded, entering the place. He looked aside while also feeling that the wolf with Ghost was about to give birth, but it continued happening. Jon, my nephews are being born. Jon found the door full of guards while Arya appeared anxious at the entrance. Yes, I'm going in. Jon playfully slapped Arya on the head and immediately entered the room. The bed was surrounded by some midwives that Jon had trained in the Arctic hospital, and with a child of the forest, Leaf, they were already here because Jon requested their stay at the castle last week. This day was getting stranger and stranger, but Jon didn't have time to think about it and quickly approached. Did both of their waters break at the same time? He asked, surprised. Yes, the gods must be intervening for their children to be born together, Leaf said. Jon! Serena saw him and smiled. I'm here, he said before also looking at Ygritte, as both occupied the two ends of the bed, for it was very large. A woman looked at him cautiously. My king, will you stay in here? She couldn't help but ask. Yes, I will help them, Jon said as he approached his wives, beginning to gently touch their heads. Ygritte was more nervous than Serena. Let's start getting them out, Leaf said while both women were at the lower part of the women. Jon touched both bellies with outstretched arms in the middle of the bed. It's going to be okay. I'm here. I will make sure nothing bad happens. Jon spoke as the palms of his hands generated some green light to help them both with the hemorrhaging and the delivery of the children. It didn't take long for the midwives to get organized as the queens began to labor, pushing the babies out, with Jon there generating healing power for Serena and Ygritte. The first child began to emerge in less than 20 minutes without any problems, as Jon quickly healed any internal damage in the women. The first to come out was Serena's son, a boy, who let out only a weak cry. The midwife quickly picked him up and wrapped him in a cloth, cleaning him and bringing him to his mother, where Serena was eagerly waiting. Jon watched, mesmerized by his first child, placed next to Serena. The boy had dark hair and slightly opened his eyes, seeing the world for the first time through his small eyes, showing two different colored eyes. While the left had an amethyst color, the right had a green as bright as Jon's. Serena quickly grabbed and hugged him with the ease of a mother holding her child for the first time. Look at him, Jon. This boy really is a carved copy of you, and will be even more so as he grows. Serena commented, and Jon could see this boy being him all over as he grew up. While he had one green eye like his, showing that the gods had also touched him, and the other purple eye represented his father's family lineage. He is blessed by the gods, Leaf exclaimed, looking as if the child were something precious. Jon leaned down, giving a kiss on both Serena's forehead and that of the baby, staring curiously, not minding being crushed by his mother. Jon still kept his hand on Ygritte, who was still pushing the almost emerging child. A minute later, another cry filled the room as a little girl had much more voice than her brother. She also ended up with Targaryen features, with her white hair as she quickly opened her eyes faster than the little boy, showing bright purple eyes. Jon couldn't help but smile, despite the evident Targaryen genetics in both. He felt his wolves reacting to this as he saw live from the window. Even Aragorn landed near the window and climbed the castle to look through the window. She's like the dragons of the south, Jon. Ygritte picked up the girl and hugged her tightly. She is, but as scandalous as her mother too, Jon murmured, despite none of his first children taking the color of his Stark eyes, and feeling as connected with them as much as his main animals, as if they were part of him in this world. You are here, finally. Jon couldn't help but murmur as he finally finished healing the wives, with both children being held by their mothers. His first heirs had finally been born. Ah! A scream from one of the midwives suddenly alerted him. What is that? She pointed behind Jon as he immediately looked back, feeling shells cracking. They're being born, Jon said with satisfaction, but surprised to see all 12 eggs cracking at this moment, and they quickly began to be destroyed as little heads began to emerge from the debris in various colors. Jon, what is this? Ygritte asked, unable to see properly while lying down. Just the companions of our children, Jon commented as the little dragons began with small cries and seemed to be learning to scream louder immediately. Jon also gave a kiss to Ygritte and his daughter, while he approached the dragon hatchlings, which seemed to be looking at him curiously, shifting their gazes between him and his children on the bed. Jon could hear Aragorn roar, flying over the castle again, as the sky began to darken while the women began to light candles to keep the room illuminated. "Is that a dragon?" One of the women approached, but as she was about to touch the dragon, it growled angrily before attempting to bite her finger, making the woman jump back. "Don't touch them. Be careful. Dragons do not accept just anyone touching," Jon warned, while he picked up the first dragon, which was bright red, looking at him curiously, which quickly began to run up his hand and along his clothes until it settled on his shoulder. None of the dragons had a problem touching him, and Jon began to pick up all of them. "Jon, what are you doing?" Serena murmured while laughing, seeing her husband covered with dragons all over his body. "I want a new bed brought in here immediately and remove this one," Jon requested, and the women exited promptly, bringing in a new bed while there were clean clothes since they needed to change the blood-soiled bed. Jon began placing the dragons on the new bed and then moved his wives and children. While he made them comfortable in the bed, full of little dragons, Serena found it amusing, but Ygritte didn't seem too comfortable with all those creatures around. "You can all leave now," Jon asked everyone who was still in the room as soon as the cleaning was complete. He now needed this time with his wives. As he sat on the bed full of dragons, with them still curiously looking both at the children and him as if they were learning, Ygritte looked at him cautiously. "These are 12 dragons. Are you really sure about this?" she asked cautiously. "Don't you see? They are here for our children. Don't worry. They will take care of them as much as we will," Serena answered, noticing that her son also kept a curious gaze on the dragons. "Now let me pick him up," Jon requested as he picked up both children and stood up, leaving just the bed with Ygritte, Serena, and the dragons fixing their eyes on Jon and the babies. Both children seemed calm. Even the noisier girl fell silent at her father's touch. "How'd you do that?" Ygritte murmured. Jon swayed them with a smile while they opened their eyes fixed on him, curious, and as he walked swaying them, the dragons continued to follow with their heads swaying from side to side. "So this is Jon," Jon murmured, looking at the boy with two colored eyes. "Yes, Jon," Serena immediately responded, having decided the boy's name a long time ago, and Jon did not disagree. Jon looked at Ygritte. "I'll name her Lyanna," he decided immediately. "Lyanna," Ygritte murmured, but she wasn't displeased with Jon naming the girl after her grandmother. "Jon Arctic and Lyanna Arctic, they will be the future of this kingdom, siblings of many others out there," Jon said, as the women broke into small smiles. "My king," a voice emerged at the entrance with the door closed at that moment. "Yes," Jon huffed, as he was in a moment he did not want to be interrupted. "Your wolf is here. He's got a pup in his mouth and wants to come in," the voice of the royal guard replied while Jon raised an eyebrow. He was so focused on his children that he hadn't seen Ghost calling him. "Let him in," he requested before the door opened, and his wolf actually brought two small pups there, held in his mouth, entering the room as the door closed again. "It seems our children will have more than just dragons," Serena couldn't help but comment. Jon put the baby pups back on the bed between the mothers and picked up the wolf pups before placing them together, one black and the other gray, who quickly began to walk among the dragons unafraid, but having difficulty walking as they fell and stumbled on their own paws until they reached the children, who cuddled into them and lay down. Many miles above Artica, passing through various plains, fields, and frozen lakes, proceeding through enormous fogs and mountains, situated in an area much colder than the south, with forests petrified by the low temperature, a huge encampment was concentrated there at this moment. The camp was crowded with tents everywhere, while men wearing leather clothes patrolled the entire region. There were two races, the giants who lived bringing logs to the camp, and the free folk, with more than 400 giants and 110,000 people of the free folk gathered there. Among the men, there were 200 wargs. This camp has been in this northern region for almost a decade, gathering everything they could save from the cold shadows, the darkness, or death gods, as many used to say. However, the enemy is beginning to move. In the last moons, the camp started receiving attacks while their scouts began to disappear, never a direct attack, just picking off one here and there, as if they were waiting for something bigger to come. Seeing the camp starting to be attacked from all sides, the people there began to worry as those monsters were becoming increasingly aggressive. The pressure on the leader began to build. Mance, the declared king beyond the wall, started to move the camp, seeing that in the north only death remained, and it was time for them to head south in search of a way to cross the wall. In the main tent of the camp, where Mance usually held his meetings with the camp's top leaders of the free folk, he was making the last one before they really left the north. As you know, Mance began. We lost all contact against all the last northern tribes we tried to recruit, but even our scouts are not returning, which ends up showing us that they are dead. He commented while the group looked grim. These fools chose not to come to this camp when they were called. Now let them die. Let's go south and dominate the Wall of the Crows. The leader of the Thens, Styr, the Magner of Then, spoke in a serious tone. I've heard some quite strange things about the South. I think you should know, Mance. A woman with a huge scar on her face spoke. It's been 16 years since I've been to the South. I'm wearing a white mask. I've heard things, too, but just very strange rumors to believe. Mance commented, Mance, if you need information from the South, I have a person from my tribe who fled from the South and was part of the Lunar tribe many years ago. One of the other leaders informed him. Isn't that one of the biggest tribes in the Southeast? I heard it was destroyed many years ago, but I didn't believe it. He said curiously he hadn't heard of them for almost a decade. When he had been in that region, just some people with rumors, but nobody from the tribe. It was Mance when he showed up at my camp. He said the tribe was decimated 7 years ago. Said the leader. Did the darkness eliminate them? He asked sadly. No, Mance, it's hard to explain, but it's better if you hear it directly from him. The leader said in a calm tone and went out to call this man. It didn't take long for this leader to enter the tent while greeting everyone with some fear. So you're from that tribe? I thought you guys had at least 2,000 men to fight with you. Mance said, waiting for the man to continue this mystery. Yes, I belong to the tribe, and we were at our peak. However, more than 7 years ago in the south, a new group began to patrol the southern region near the coast, recruiting tribes. They called themselves the Artican tribe. Our warg started to watch them, and we saw the large tribe with a group of giants, a number larger than in this camp. The tribe was made of giants, men, and even many animals. We spotted many giant wolves, at least about 50 of them roaming the nomadic tribe. They were a group of 4,000. We were interested in them. They had food and weapons we had never seen before. There were giants and animals covered in strange metal that shone in a green hue, but we were much smaller than them. He spoke, pausing while everyone looked curious about what they had just heard. It seemed that the South was quite bustling while they were in the North, still pondering what they had just heard, wondering whether to believe those words or not. The former member of the Lunar tribe continued. So we recruited other tribes and agreed to openly attack them to divide their spoils, but it was our biggest mistake in the end. He looked somber. We had 3,000 warriors, but we didn't stand a chance. What do you mean? The man with a huge scar on his face. Styr asked curiously, as many around the tent thought similarly. The man took a deep breath before continuing. When we attacked, we faced 400 giants from the enemies. Even knowing it would be difficult, we were confident, but of the 400, 200 were archers and had a range greater than any archer in our tribe. They could launch arrows like 6 archers throwing arrows for one to catch and throw to the next. He spoke. After all, the free folk had no notion of distance, but their arrows could reach up to 50 meters on average, which was much less than a common giant, with a bow launching arrows at 300 meters. At that time, John faced this group before finding Weirwood, which would later be the place where Artica was born. He finished his words with a sad demeanor and full of traumas from that day, still remembering how his people were massacred when he was one of the ones who most wanted to attack that strange tribe. They killed 400 to 500 bodies with each volley of giant arrows, Mance. I saw my companions falling, one after another, as we tried to reach them. When we thought of fleeing, seeing that it was a lost fight, they threw something behind us because everything exploded in green fire. I've never seen anything like it in my life. It seemed like witchcraft. We couldn't run to the opposite side, and when we went to the right and left sides, being the only way out, but we were attacked by people of the free folk along with animals and giants, all surrounding us while we were massacred mercilessly. 3,000 men were reduced to nothing in a single battle. It was shameful and terrifying. I was one of the few who survived with some luck while escaping that chaos. He finished. That sounds like nonsense. snarled the leader of the Thens, finally realizing how this story seemed like a fantasy. That is hard to believe. That's why I didn't report this years ago when I found him wandering the forest traumatized. Morna White Mask said, Mance, you don't believe this, do you? Another spoke. I can't say I don't believe it until I see it with my own eyes. Mance looked curiously at the man. He seemed not to lie, but the way he was scared just by talking about it could tell he might have gone mad. Were there giant animals besides the giant wolves? Six Skins, who is considered the greatest warg in the north at this camp, asked curiously. There were bears, shadow cats, and all those terrible wolves. Many were armored along with some giants. We heard there's just one person controlling all of them. They called him the War King by rumors. He spoke. War King? Look at that Six Skins. Seems like you're not so impressive after all. There's someone more powerful than you in the south. One of the leaders teased the man. That must be nonsense. What kind of person controls 60 terrible wolves? That shouldn't be possible. Another person said in support of Six Skins. A warg usually has one animal for life, and I only got my second when I was 23. He said as a warg too, hardly believing these words. There was a child. The man from the lunar tribe began speaking again, capturing everyone's attention. He rode a giant wolf as if he commanded it, but he might be a child. That thing was a demon. He dismounted from his wolf and began to cut down my companions one after the other. A child doesn't move that way. I saw him kill 10 men, and I started to flee. I never want to return to the southeast. I'm afraid of encountering that demon. They made no prisoners. He just killed us like a plague until the last. The man finished his story with a lifeless expression. By the gods, if this spreads, it will cause chaos in the camp when we go south, said another leader. That clearly can't be true. Look at the man, he's mad. It could have been the darkness that did this, and he thinks he saw something else, said a 19-year-old blonde-haired girl behind Mance. Let's not worry about that now. Let's just prepare to head south. I want to see if we can find this Artican tribe, and I want any updated information from the south. We left that place without paying attention to what was happening there. Now it seems like a mess, he said. Mance, I have some members of my tribe who were recruited. They talked about a group of normal men, small men, and giant men wearing metal clothes marching in the south recruiting tribes. One of the leaders said, Then I want to see them. I need more information from that place. But anyway, let's move the camp south. I need to know how the situation in the Seven Kingdoms is so we can decide how to act. I have a spy in the Night's Watch who can give us good information, Mance said as everyone nodded. The camp began to be dismantled the next moment as they moved south. Meanwhile, Mance started to hear more about this strange group in the south and seemed quite hopeful about recruiting them to attack the wall, seeing it as a potential great ally with the resources he heard about. Perhaps they would even have to take them by force, but he believed he would handle it well when he has more than 100,000 people to fight by his side. Meanwhile, a moon had passed in Artica since the royal birth, while the kingdom entered a week-long festival after the children were born. Jon had to participate in some banquets held in the arenas, carrying his children. What relieved him was how the children seemed not to care about all the noise, even though there were hundreds of thousands of people paying attention to them. Or even when Jon had to take them to see Aragon while the small dragons followed him along with the wolf pups, which basically followed them and stayed close when not with their mother nursing them. And as Ghost stayed with Jon all the time, his companion was also there while Jon was near his children. It was a strange feeling being a father. He shared his blood with those two little beings and felt happy and fulfilled by this. He wanted them well and wouldn't think twice about giving his life to protect them. Little Jon, as everyone called him being the firstborn and having his green eye trait, was the quietest of his children. He was calm, yet curious as his eyes looked from one side to another, seeming to want to learn about the world around him. Lyanna was the opposite when it came to behavior, as the girl was entirely imperative. She laughed more easily than her brother and cried much more, while she liked to move, trying to crawl, and even try and climb on Jon's and her mother's clothes. Both wives, Serena and Ygritte, came to the conclusion that they would consider both children theirs to avoid any jealousy from either, while trying to treat everyone equally, and Jon appreciated that. After a week of festivities, Jon isolated himself, saying that he wanted to be part of his children's first month. So he left all the city's work with his ministers, and he could only be called in case of an emergency, and stayed that way, while Artica continued to develop as expected. His only concern outside his family was his experiments in developing potions with dosages for growth and immunity strengthening for children and the magic stones created by his tree in the king's greenhouse. After all these weeks, he finally decided to have a serious conversation about something he had waited a moon to address with his former sister. He was calmly walking through the castle, following the corridor while his guards accompanied him. But it was not just his guards, but 12 dragons walking behind Jon in line, making sounds all around, yet still following Jon closely. At the end of the corridor, there was a door with many guards at the entrance. "You wait here. I'll go in alone," he told his men, as they lined up with their companions already at the entrance. The doors were opened for him as he entered the room, in a unique environment within that castle. And there, unsurprisingly, were his wives with their children, Arya, and Ghost with his companion. This was a place he had built to be a kind of special garden in the middle of the castle, with a small stream running along the roots of the grand weirwood, passing beneath the castle and overflowing water above. The garden had been designed to make the environment more natural, with a huge glass window allowing the sun to illuminate the place. Jon approached them with his dragons, while watching Arya playing with his daughter, having fun as always. After all, the two were very much alike. "Jon," Serena smiled as her eyes went to the dragons following him, while the little wolves ended up staying with their children all the time. "These little creatures are following you everywhere now, aren't they?" She laughed at the comment. Jon just smiled, watching the small creatures approach as they began to disperse, coming closer to where the children were emitting childish sounds, as if they also wanted their attention. Jon didn't know who they liked more, but it didn't matter. He avoided stepping on some of the dragons surrounding the group and approached, giving a small kiss on the forehead of each wife, Arya, and his children, before petting Ghost at the side. "Could you give us some privacy?" Jon looked at his wives, who quickly understood. After all, they themselves had urged him to talk to Arya about fatherhood. Jon had put it off due to the birth of his children, but knew it was time to tell. "Stay, Arya, and come, Ghost, with your companion. Come keep us company. Let's take a walk," Ygritte said. Arya was confused as Serena and Ygritte led the two giant wolves out the door, leaving just her, Jon, the dragons, little wolves, and their children, while Jon had taken little Jon from Serena. His son watched him with curiosity, raising his little hands and squeezing his cheeks, laughing. Jon opened a loving smile, finding it amusing, looking into those eyes so different and magical at the same time. Lyanna saw this too and began to cry, pointing her little hand at Jon. Arya saw this, now being ignored by the fussy Lyanna, and immediately complained. "Jon, how do you do that? You're the only one she wants to get away from me for. She just wants her father's lap," Jon commented, approaching as he took little Jon from his lap, while picking up Lyanna, before giving the boy to Arya to hold. Despite the girl Stark's dissatisfaction, she found herself being stared at by the curious Jon, who looked at her with as much curiosity as anyone else. "Look who it is. It's Andy." Arya finally smiled at that. Meanwhile, Jon kept Lyanna lively in his arms while laughing the whole time as he made gentle rocking movements, walking calmly from one side to the other while the dragons just watched, turning their necks like a bunch of meerkats. "She's going to be so beautiful with that white hair." Arya looked at Jon, unable to refrain from commenting. Jon sighed and realized that he should tell her. After all, Arya kept asking why the girl had this hair color while the boy shared a purple eye, but Ygritte always dodged it, saying Jon would explain it in the future. "Arya, do you know why both were born with purple eyes? And why Lyanna has this color in her hair?" Jon asked, as Arya looked at him touching the dragons at their feet. Although they didn't much like her touch, they also didn't move away since the children were there. "I don't know," Arya responded. Ygritte always avoided talking about it. Said I should ask you, "Why does your daughter have white hair and purple eyes?" She asked. "It's because I'm a Targaryen," Jon simply said. Arya was distracted, but quickly raised her gaze, surprised as if she were looking at a Jon who had been born with a second head. "What did you say?" she asked, incredulous. Jon sighed and came closer. Listen, when I found out about this, I was equally shocked. That was on the same day they were born. It seemed like the gods were warning me about my true origin and to understand how this would affect our children. So when I left Artica, I went to the statue of my mother in Winterfell. But then your mother, Arya murmured, still shocked. Wait, you've been to Winterfell? Statue of your mother, she exclaimed, startling Little Jon a bit, and the dragon screamed in disapproval. Calm down. Jon approached as he touched Little Jon's head in front of Arya. It's not the way you're thinking. Your father isn't my father. I am the son of Lyanna. My father is Rhaegar Targaryen. Jon spoke to her for the first time. Arya looked at him, even more shocked, trying to process the words that had come out of his mouth. Is that true? So you're my cousin? She said in an unconscious tone. I know it's hard to understand. My life has always been a lie. I believe your father was my father, but he lied so much that in a moment of anger, I almost crushed his face on the same day I learned the truth. When I went to my mother's tomb, Jon continued, you went to Winterfell that day. You really almost hit our father. I mean my father. She was trying to absorb all this information without being able to think properly. Arya, you might be angry about what I just told you. Yes, I am the son of Rhaegar, the one who died at the Trident in the battle against King Robert. I went to Lyanna's tomb because I wanted to see the statue of my mother. I wanted to see my mother buried in those crypts all this time without me knowing the truth. When I left Winterfell at 8 named days, I decided I wouldn't speak of her with my father again since she was dead. But honestly, she was always someone I wanted to know who she was. When I found out, I went straight there, but unfortunately, your father appeared. It was the moment I was looking at the statue. Jon paused, taking a deep breath. I was so enraged that I lifted him up and punched the wall next to his face. I didn't want to do anything stupid, so I left before something worse could happen. I was angry, Arya. Jon finished, feeling relieved to finally have told the truth. Jon didn't even have time to react as Arya threw herself on him, careful not to hurt Little Jon, leaving the king of Artica slightly surprised. I'm sorry for this, Jon, she said, surprising him as tears came out of her eyes. I'm sorry for all this. You should never have had to go through what you did in Winterfell. I'm sorry for what my father did. Robb and Theon are the real culprits of that damn theft. I always knew, but I could never do anything. But I swear, when I go to Winterfell, I will bring that castle to its knees until I prove your innocence. She exclaimed with a sob, still holding him close and holding Little Jon, who looked curious, as did Lyanna, watching the two embraced. The dragons seemed equally curious on the ground, raising their heads and curving their necks, trying to understand what was happening. It's all right, Arya. I have an entire kingdom to take care of to worry about something so insignificant. And I will always love you, no matter what we are, Jon spoke, accepting her embrace and letting Arya's tears fall on his shoulder. But you know, Jon, Arya spoke again, wiping some of her tears with her free hand. You might not like my words, but I'm glad things happened the way they did. Now we're here, in this place. She continued, wiping away the tears while a smile and a blush appeared on her face. Jon also smiled at the girl. Yes, Arya, you're right. We can't have everything we wanted, but fate and the gods were still generous. I have a family now here and wouldn't change anything up to this moment. I have you, Serena, Ygritte, and our children and my other companions by my side. Jon said, happy to share this moment with Arya, as both shared these warm and sincere words, happy that fate had brought them to this point, wondering what else it would bring. Any news from the south? Jon asked while surrounded by council members. We haven't heard anything yet, and the patrol hasn't made any moves. Brynden said, all right, if they attack, I'll leave someone to deal with them alone, Jon warned but continued. But I'm also worried about the movements of the real enemies to the north. We're just dealing with men in the south, but to the north, our true enemy remains silent. We haven't seen any suspicious activity from them on a large scale yet, but I know they're still waiting to make some move. But I'm sure I can still make my trip to Essos. However, I need some direct contact to understand the situation from here. There's a large group coming from the north, right? Jon asked, Yes. Brynden spoke, and Jon nodded. It's very likely to take years to reach this part with their army. Jon commented, after all, it was a lot of people to move. He himself wandered almost a year with a much smaller group than this one, through the region before finding the place where he would build Artica. About our trip, I'm leaving with some ministers. Jon spoke again, while the topic now was about the trip to Essos. Should I go to Dorne, my king? Daenerys asked, and Jon nodded. Yes, I want you to see our situation with the Dornish, and also I want you to do something important. I need you to deliver a message to someone important, and even take her out of Dorne if she agrees. I won't let her be a political piece of her uncle, not anymore. Jon spoke with a serious tone, as his minister spoke. You will continue handling the projectiles of the kingdom. Maester Aemon will be responsible for managing the educators for all the Articans. I'm sure we can at least alphabetize them in the common tongue in 2 or 3 years. After that, they will learn new languages. The children will be even faster. Jon spoke and continued, looking at the daughter of the forest. Of course, my king. Aemon responded with a small smile. About my project, I've worked all week to create a tree that meets the need to create a luminous crystal that charges through solar energy via photosynthesis. For that, I had to create a plant organism in it, and it needs exposure to the sun. But it will take a year to start producing the crystals if nothing goes wrong as well. I'll leave the rest with you, Seraphine. I want you to take care of the project. Jon advised. The daughter of the forest nodded. Kira, continue organizing the new district judges. I want everyone to be judged honestly within the ethical framework we set up. I will take care of all that, the woman said firmly. I also want you to recruit wargs. We have some crimes that I myself have to investigate when we can't find a culprit, and I unravel them through the memories of the animals, my source of surveillance. But I couldn't do this forever. That's why I want you to start recruiting people who are capable of tracking down the criminals and solving the crimes. Jon spoke. After all, he'd been doing some of those jobs last week. It was very rare, but he wouldn't leave the people without justice and ended up catching the criminals, many of whom are working together with the prisoner from the south, or even with their heads beheaded. Artica should be just with those who are part of it. As for the enemies, they will soon feel a terror as soon as they think they survived in the lands beyond the wall. How many ships do you intend to take, my king? Thor asked. All 500 ships. I'm sure you will build a few more to continue the trade with the south and to start trade with Essos, as we make contracts with the continent. Jon said, do you think the continent will welcome us after what happened in Westeros? Daenerys asked cautiously, and Jon was not annoyed by his question. After all, it was something rational and to debate. They might not accept us, Jon admitted, but let's see what they have to say. It doesn't hurt to try. Besides, we have business with products much superior to the market at an affordable price. Not to mention that we have the monopoly of ice, and Dorne is the only kingdom that can enjoy this trade until further notice. Jon spoke, but I want Gavrin to accompany me to Braavos. Jon went back to speaking while everyone looked at him, especially Gavrin curiously. How may I assist you, my king? He asked, and Jon just cracked a smile. You are my master of coin. About what we discussed 2 weeks ago regarding my plan, I'm going to do it, Jon declared with a smile. My king, you're going to buy? The minister was stunned by this. Yes, I'm going to buy the Iron Bank, he declared, leaving everyone there stunned. Are you really going to do this, my king? Brynden said, surprised, having never heard anyone make such a statement. Yes, I'll start by becoming the main shareholder depositing currency. It will be advantageous for them. After all, our bank is almost being created, and we will start to inject money to circulate in Artica. Today we have a lot of work, but everyone benefits. I want the currency to circulate and be the reward for everything that the Articans work for. This will make people with innovative ideas emerge, and the market will do its own work, Jon declared. After all, he believed in a free market, where the tax of Artica would only be collected to handle its basic institutions, such as state, security, health, and education. After all, even the people who make it up need to receive money for their work. Couldn't this end up having some problems, my king? Daenerys asked again cautiously. That's why we will maintain rules that no one, not even the ministers and king, will be above our fundamental laws. This will prevent someone from being immoral in any position they hold in Artica, with judges to judge any important case, no matter who. After all, I do not want one day some mad tyrant to assume my position as king. Jon spoke with a firm tone. He did not want to see his kingdom that he himself founded being destroyed, as happened with many of the kings of the South. I see. And with the Iron Bank, will you assume the economy of Essos, my king? Gavrin asked curiously. Yes. I can't take the money from Essos, but I'm sure there are many products that we can trade there and labor. It will be an economy that will benefit all of us, and I will have the security of the Iron Bank not trying to profit from me, while I have the most power of it, Jon said as the others nodded. Anyway, I will prepare. I will leave here in 2 weeks. So I want everyone to work on their own projects and everything to be ready by the time I return from ET. Jon said, thinking about his trip to the eastern country. Brynden. Jon called him as they left. Can you lend me some of your power? I need to see some things in the green site. Jon asked, and Brynden nodded, and they headed to the Great Weirwood, while Jon entered the green site with Brynden after a year without doing so. What do you want to see? Brynden asked. There's a dragon in Skagos. I want to know which one. Jon said, making Brynden raise an eyebrow. A dragon? He asked, not knowing about it. Yes, I felt it, and it even spoke to me through the mind. Its eyes were bright green and even evil, with flames also having the same coloration as wildfire. I researched, and I believe it to be Cannibal, who fled during the Dance of the Dragons. At this moment, he is larger than Balerion the Black Dread from Aegon. Jon said, after all, that dragon was immense now. That is quite unexpected. I had never looked at this dragon. Brynden really had never researched where this dragon was and did not expect it to be so close to the wall the entire time, let alone alive. All right, let's see this dragon, Brynden said as they followed, leaning on the roots of the Grand Weirwood. Brynden quickly used his powers to connect with the past while Jon and he transformed their eyes into white globes. Everything darkened as they woke up in the middle of the Dance of the Dragons. This event had already been seen by both, so they ignored the war happening in Westeros between the Greens and the Blacks, while they focused on staying in Dragonstone. Now we have to know when he left his nest, Jon commented as Brynden began to mess with time, while they watched several dragons coming and going on the island, but none being Cannibal. Then finally a dragon that was not at all small, being larger than all except for Vhagar, came out of its lair spewing green flames all over the path as it flew out of the island, with people screaming at it, but it didn't care as it headed north. It seems this is the moment. We'll head to Skagos and wait for him there, Brynden said, and the scene shifted again as Jon and he found themselves on the northern island, with snow covering all the forests as they waited on a mountain. It didn't take long for the giant bird to appear in the sky, as it began to fly over the mountains near them. Jon wondered if anyone had seen the dragon, but it was likely not. At that time, Greggan Stark had managed to gather all the forces of the island to fight with him for the Blacks in the south, while the island was much emptier. The dragon seemed to be looking at the mountains and investigating the dormant volcanoes on it, as it started to flap its wings at one point and descended into a cave where it entered after hitting the rocks several times to enlarge the entrance and remained there until the end of the Dance of the Dragons in the south. Over the years, it only came out to hunt, but it had a lifestyle that summed up in going out to eat enough and hibernate, something Jon did not know dragons did. Cannibal went out to hunt large fish and even whales in the trembling sea. While over the centuries, Skagos knew of its presence, almost declaring it as a god, or, as they were drawing on their wall for the tribes there, as the Lord of the Mountain, even delivering some offerings in search of blessing and protection. The vision ended there, as the dragon remained on the mountain to this day. Brynden returned to his normal state and looked at Jon curiously. What do you plan to do with him, my king? He asked. After the trip to Essos, I intend to try to tame him, Jon declared. Do you think you can manage that? He is probably the most powerful dragon Westeros has ever seen. Brynden spoke with a concerned tone. Aragon is growing fast. When I return, he will be prepared and wearing armor. Then I will face him. If you think I can be defeated, I have confidence to the contrary, Jon said firmly, and Brynden just nodded. Now I must go. I need to speak with Aemon and Archmaester Marwyn. Jon bid farewell and left the Grand Weirwood and went to the university, where he found both in a hidden room with important books. "Here is everything we discovered this week, my king," Archmaester Marwyn commented, handing the paper to Jon as he read. "So, the Maesters knew of the relationship between my mother and the prince and manipulated the ravens to put as many people as possible in favor of Robert's rebellion," Jon commented with anger. "Even that Maester before Luwin, that bastard had received the message, but he did not deliver it to my maternal grandfather," Jon spoke angrily. "Not just that, my boy," Eamon spoke with a sad tone. "They poisoned Riella and her babies, making her lose the babies, while making the king crazier and more paranoid with other poisons," he spoke with a sad tone. "They analyzed all the books that Jon had stolen. There were many secret things they researched, like wargs, theories, and magical arts, despite hating magic, but Jon was more interested in how they tried to manipulate the entire continent. They had the ears of all the lords of Westeros. They could pass any wrong information or convince their lords of the path they wanted the city to take. I'm sure everyone in Westeros would be shocked with this information. Even Tywin did not come out unscathed while his wife was poisoned in the last pregnancy," Marwyn said. Jon did not care about that now. He just sighed. "Let's just keep this information and maybe use it in the future, but now is not interesting. As for the knowledge of the Citadel, we don't need it, since it's inferior to that of Artica," Jon said. "Yes, my king, it seems that my colleagues have always been quite anxious, whether in this generation or before." "I am quite shocked," Marwyn murmured. "Now I'm heading back to the castle. So organize things." Jon spoke as he left the university and went to the king's castle to spend his time with his wives and talk about the trip. Meanwhile, a man was striking against the rocks using a pickaxe. He was tired as he sweated all over his body, in a state he had never reached before in his life until a few moons ago. As he hit to break the rocks, he wondered how his life had ended up so far from his family, being a prisoner beyond the wall. "What am I seeing? A southerner working, 2 southerners working, 3 southerners working." And to help, he began to hear a song behind him in a not-so-tuned tone as a deep voice sang. This was a dwarf overseeing the prisoners, whether it was him or the hundreds captured from the Red Wine Fleet. "What am I singing, Pop?" Another dwarf approached with his mount, looking curiously at his friend. "Nothing much, just counting how many southern workers we have here," he said. "You sing very badly, and your music doesn't match. So learn." This year the dwarf spoke with a smile in his eyes. "1 kneeling southerner working, 2 kneeling southerners working, 3 kneeling southerners working." He began to sing. "Mine sounds better, Mac," Pop complained. "So how about we sing together?" Mac suggested, and Pop nodded. "What am I seeing? A southerner working, 2 southerners working, 3 southerners working." Both began to sing together. "Can you shut up?" Suddenly, the former Lord Hightower shouted, making the dwarves surprised as they looked at him. "Did he curse us, Mac?" one asked. "I believe so, Pop." "What shall we do?" Lord Hightower's brother was getting increasingly irritated. Not only had his life been reduced from feast to something so humiliating, but he also had to endure this mockery from the common folk of these lands. This is torture. Someone like him should not be going through such a situation. He thought, frustrated. "Can you stop singing and shut your damn mouths, you damn dwarves?" he shouted, while the other men at his side looked on cautiously, wondering what would happen to him. "Looks like the southerner is upset. What can we do with him, Pop?" Mac asked. "Let's make him run naked across the wall," Pop suggested. "That sounds very good. Let's see if he won't appreciate our songs after that," Mac said confidently. "But first let's sing. I am seeing a southerner working, 2 southerners working, 3 southerners working." They went back to singing again to annoy him even more. "Shut your damn mouths," the man exclaimed with all his strength, driven mad by his situation, and, regardless of being punished for it, he just wanted to lash out at someone and curse his damn fate. "Ha ha ha." The dwarves were enjoying themselves and laughing at the man's suffering. "Any problems?" Suddenly, heavy footsteps began to come, with a giant approaching in armor and shield and spear. All the prisoners froze as he approached, while the dwarves had a smile. "We have one of them offended by our glorious music. We don't know what to do with him. He even was offending Artica," a dwarf said with a sinister smile. "I see. You will be punished," the giant announced as he approached him. while the man looked terrified at that. Wait, don't take me to that place again. The man now remembered that the punishments here were harsh, and he was about to be taken to one of them. The man spoke, trying to convince them not to do it, but it was too late. As he was taken to an isolated cell without food, he could only watch as he was led by the hand of the giant to the city. While the common people lived there, he was being treated like a dog. If he had known this would happen, he would never have obeyed his brother's orders and would have helped the Articans to kill their own Maesters and Septons. But it was too late, and he could only curse his life as he was led away. Meanwhile, in the castle, Jon was having a conversation alone with his wives in the garden inside the castle, while holding his 2 children and gently rocking them to keep them calm in their father's arms. He looked at his wives seated and decided to break the silence after a small talk about the next trip he would make to Essos. So, you decided to stay, that's good. I prefer you stayed even this time, and you will come with me. Jon said to Serena and Ygritte. Yes, someone has to stay and look after the children. Serena spoke. And someone has to take care of you, Ygritte said as Jon smiled. The children are still very young and need someone to take care of them here. That's why Serena would be the one responsible for nursing them, while Ygritte will go with Jon to ensure that everything goes well on the journey, and so she can keep an eye on her husband. All right, I think we can do it this way. It's a pity that I couldn't be together his first year, but it is at this moment that we need to strengthen Artica for their future and for this nation to be prosperous. I will cross the sea, and they will have an ideal Artica, Jon said, kissing both babies. The women nodded as Jon turned back to look at the city. So it's decided, let's start preparing to travel to Essos, Jon declared. It was morning while Jon was eating with his family when Arya approached the table, making him raise an eyebrow at her, as she was wearing a dress with her sword at her waist. We're eating, Arya. Why are you bringing that sword with you? Jon asked with a raised eyebrow, while the girl shrugged rebelliously. Lyanna and Little Jon at the table looked on curiously as Arya approached them, giving them a big kiss on their cheeks before picking up Lyanna, while Jon just watched curiously. Lyanna immediately made excited sounds at Arya, receiving kisses from her. Serena and Ygritte continued their meals peacefully, while Arya continued holding Lyanna to sit with her. Jon picked up his son, who was standing there watching, and placed him on his lap to eat something healthy at the table. Little Jon looked at him with his green and purple eyes while his small hands clutched Jon's arm, holding him there. Jon then cut a piece of fruit and gave it to him to eat. Give her this, Arya, Ygritte said, handing a cup of milk to Lyanna to drink. The girl nodded as she fed the little girl with the cup little by little. Jon, Win can come with us, right? Arya suddenly asked about her old friend, the child of the forest. Yes, but you must behave, Jon warned. Yes, Arya exclaimed as Jon nodded to that. Serena smiled at this before placing her hand on her son's head, who was on her husband's lap. He looked at her while eating the piece of fruit Jon gave him and smiled back at her. The family continued eating in peace for a while, interacting with each other, until Jon decided to leave first, as he had responsibilities as king that day. Take him. I'm going to the Senate, Jon said, lifting Little Jon and handing him to Serena. He then stood up from the table and left the area with a few guards. Today, there would be an important meeting with the entire Senate, so he had to attend along with the ministers to decide on some laws and plans for the kingdom, while the representatives would speak for the people, not placing all the power in the hands of the counselors. After that, he went to the council to organize some more projects, mainly related to the courts and the crystals, while Jon went to the king's greenhouse to check on the tree that would produce the first crystals this year, with Seraphine and Leaf by his side to discuss the project. Jon left the greenhouse while flying Aragon a bit over the sky of Artica before returning to the castle in the late afternoon. All the dragons were near Aragon's landing strip, as Jon watched with interest as they approached the massive dragon. Aragon looked at the little ones with curiosity as they stared back at him, feeling the large dragon's beak touch them as they were sniffed. I want you to take care of them, understand? Jon asked, and the dragon just sighed in confirmation. Jon nodded, satisfied before touching the dragon's head. I also want you to help me with that when they get near this kingdom. Show no mercy, Jon requested, and the dragon just looked at him, understanding what he meant. Leaving the dragons behind, Jon went to his room at the end of the day, enjoying the last hours of his time in Artica. He would leave the next day and made the most of his time with his children and wives as a family. Then the day arrived. Jon woke up quickly, finding the city in great excitement. The army had already been preparing since before dawn, marching towards the port, guided by royal guards. Duncan, his military minister, would remain in Artica taking care of things if intervention with the Artica army was necessary. This call was more than double the last, summoning over 20,000 men to join the expedition in Essos and the Eastern Lands. Jon made sure to leave all plans for Brynden and the other ministers to execute while he finally headed to the port with his family. Most of the city gathered for his farewell, knowing that the king would be leaving for another and final continent. Tons of goods filled the ships as men shouted orders here and there. Once again, Jon was heading to his main ship with Ygritte, Arya, Wind, and his guards. "It looks like we have to say goodbye," Jon murmured, looking at Serena with their 2 children in her arms, as he approached to give them a final touch of farewell. "Good luck, and come back soon," Jon heard Serena say as they paid attention to their 2 children staring at him. "Yes, I will return soon, and will be here to guide them as soon as possible," Jon commented as he looked at his wife. "I probably won't be here for some of their first milestones, but I know you'll take care of them well while I'm away," Jon commented, and Serena nodded. "Take as much time as you need so that you never have to leave this kingdom again, and I'll take care of our children until then." She spoke, and Jon nodded in farewell. Ygritte and Arya also approached Serena as they said their goodbyes, while Jon began to head towards the ship, giving orders. Almost everyone in Artica was watching as 500 ships were filled in the next few hours, wishing good luck to all who would travel south. "Jon, I don't want to get pregnant on this trip, all right?" Ygritte said to him on a part of the deck as he watched the other ships being filled by other Articans. He nodded. "All right, we'll have more children when we return." Jon smiled, and she nodded, not refusing the idea of becoming a mother again. Aragon flew over the port at this moment, roaring as he passed over the ships, but with his sapphire eyes fixed on Jon. His gaze fell on the boat as Arya entered with her friend, Wind, proudly displaying the sword she had received. "My king, the ships are almost ready." The captain of the main ship came up to him. "Great, start sailing with the first ships. The channel can't accommodate everything at once, so we'll begin to gather at sea outside the channel." Jon gave the order, and the captain quickly nodded, shouting orders as a ship would depart first. "My king, I'm sure this journey will be a success." Gavrin approached. There were only 2 ministers on his ship, this one and Junli, who would accompany him to Braavos. Meanwhile, Darius was heading straight to Dorne to negotiate with the Martell family, or at least that was the plan. After all, Jon was ready to sever ties with Dorne if he could retrieve Rhaenys from them. The ship then departed as others began to follow, and the channel quickly began to fill as they left the kingdom, with people shouting words of good luck to them. "We've taken the first step. Now we have the basics. It's time to establish our position in this world's economy," Jon declared. After all, he would finally open up the economy and allow Articans to create their own businesses. Even the ice supply would be shared with the people, as long as the royal family retained 51% of the shares. This, among other businesses, would give people the freedom to create their own companies. With the trade channel, it would be very easy for them to open their own businesses along these routes while using the ships. The statue of Artica was soon left behind as they continued along the miles of the channel, encountering some free folk walking along the shore watching them. But no one attacked them, as the entire channel was filled with ships as they headed for the sea. It was after hours that the frozen sea finally came into view, and they began to navigate around the icebergs, finding a place to wait for the other ships to join them. It was a long process, so much so that it wasn't until nightfall that all 500 ships were finally gathered. Jon used this time to summon Sarum, who was near the sea, trembling, as the people followed to stay below the ships and follow them to the end of their journey. Then the ships began to head south during the night, passing along the coast for the next few days. In Hardhome, more and more people continued to gather there, and Jon ordered the rout to go outside Skagos to avoid alerting the north. One night, while Jon was sleeping with Ygritte, he took the opportunity to guide a raven to the wall and go to Castle Black to see how things were there. He found a camp in front of it on this side of the wall, where it seemed that the First Kingdoms had sent their groups, bearing the banners of the Vale, Arryn, and the West, while others were expected to arrive the following week. Jon was not worried about them. After all, Aragon had been instructed to deal with all of them, and he could eliminate thousands of men whenever he wanted. After Skagos, they continued heading south for a week until they finally began to see Essos on the horizon. The first stop would be Braavos, where they would see how they would be treated after their reputation for what they had done in Westeros. Meanwhile, a group of 50 ships split off from the 500, heading south, heavily armed to face any force at sea. However, they doubted that Westeros could attack them after what had happened, as they headed towards Dorne and hoped to meet the fleet to the south before moving to the southern cities of the continent and then to the Jade Sea. In another place further south, in one of the coastal cities, Pentos, as the sun rose, the city began to bustle with a movement of merchants and inhabitants. In one of the city's most luxurious houses, a young woman with silver hair watched the horizon with a calm expression. She was Daenerys Targaryen and knew she was a pure-blood Targaryen, with her violet eyes reflecting the sea. As she thought about her life and how she ended up here after all the misfortune, she and her brother managed to get to Braavos while she was just a baby and lived with Ser Willem-Darry, who cared for her and Viserys until his death. Since then, the two siblings found themselves at the mercy of the generosity of the lords of Essos, moving from city to city in search of support to reclaim the Iron Throne. Today, their patron was Magister Illyrio, who had provided his house for them to live in Pentos until it was time for her brother to act and claim the crown. As Daenerys continued to gaze at the horizon, a sense of unease grew within her. News had been arriving from the west. Surprising news of a new kingdom establishing itself beyond the wall, launching an attack on Westeros, and defeating Robert Baratheon at sea. She had been shocked when she heard about it at dinner while her brother and Illyrio conversed. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted as she looked to the side, seeing her brother appearing in another corridor, talking with Illyrio as they walked. "Are you saying we can't get involved with them?" Viserys shouted. "My prince, you've heard the rumors. We cannot contact that group. They are extremely dangerous. There are many rumors that their king is a sorcerer," Illyrio commented, which did not seem to satisfy Viserys, while Daenerys listened from the side without them noticing. "They defeated the Stag King. They are my chance to claim the throne of my family and what is rightfully mine," he exclaimed angrily. "But that doesn't mean they are trustworthy. You might even take advantage of the chaos they are creating in the Seven Kingdoms, but trusting them, I wouldn't recommend that," Illyrio said firmly, insisting that the Articans should not be trusted. Daenerys listened in silence. "You underestimate me, Illyrio." She heard her brother begin to laugh. "I have something that Northern Savage might be interested in," he said firmly. "My prince, you can't be thinking." Illyrio seemed worried. "These savages might be a better opportunity than your suggestion to talk to the desert savages. I'm just trading one savage for another, who will be my future subjects, and I will gladly give my sister to them, as I would to those desert horses," Viserys said firmly, while Daenerys became more concerned about her future and her brother's plans. She would be lying if she said she wasn't afraid of these Articans and what they could do to her. Viserys and Illyrio walked through the corridor, continuing their conversation until they came upon Daenerys, who quickly looked at the ground, not wanting to offend them and awaken her brother's dragon, who would hit her when that happened. "Dany, my dear sister," Viserys smiled, seeing Daenerys as a valuable bargaining chip. "I'll be attending to some matters now, my prince," Illyrio said as he withdrew, leaving Viserys talking to Daenerys, who looked at him with fear. Illyrio continued his way through his mansion, heading to his solar. He spotted a raven perched with something tied to its leg, waiting for him. He nodded in satisfaction, recognizing the owner of the scroll, someone he was about to send a message to. Approaching the bird, He took the message tied to its leg and sat down to read it. It was from Varys in King's Landing. Varys spoke of how the realm was unstable at that moment. The council seemed to be quarreling over various matters, trying to find a way to deal with Jon Artica and his powerful kingdom. They began by sending men to their deaths in the north, while Tywin Lannister wanted to make a bold move by marrying Princess Myrcella to the king beyond the wall. Varys also mentioned that council members were being attacked by the sorcerer, while Baelish and Cersei seemed to be seeking a direct and brutal alternative, trying to have the Artican killed by a faceless man. But Tywin saw an opportunity, believing he could access Artican resources despite what had happened. He seemed to see much to gain by allying with the group. Illyrio didn't know what was worse, the Targaryens forming an alliance with the Articans or even the Lannisters. He knew this would complicate all his plans, and he and Varys were working to ensure the people of the North did not enter into an alliance with anyone else, aiming to isolate them and deal with them in the future. He quickly grabbed a quill and began writing a report to his trusted friend in Westeros. We must destroy any alliance they may form. After all, our best candidate for the Iron Throne is in the Golden Company. In a few years, he will be ready to claim that seat and rule Westeros, as is his right. Illyrio wrote as he finished, placing it back on the Raven and sending it westward. Illyrio wondered what the next moves of the Articans would be after what had happened with Westeros. After all, Varys's little birds spoke of rumors about the Articans planning to come to Essos as well, seeking trade. But he didn't know if this move would happen soon. After all, their reputation wasn't the best, and he was sure that other cities besides Braavos would be afraid to open their ports to them. If they came to Pentos in the future, would he allow their entry? His city could be sacked, or he could even allow them to have contact with the Targaryens. He should do everything to prevent that. After all, Illyrio needed to accelerate his plans against the two siblings, wanting to remove them from the game for the next player to enter the Game of Thrones. Illyrio didn't yet know that the Articans already had a fleet approaching Braavos. Only a few ships had spotted them, but none could match the speed of those ships, which were passing other boats as they headed to Braavos at that very moment. In another part of Essos, where a mountain full of volcanoes continued to erupt from time to time, with rivers of lava flowing across the land filled with smoke and heat, deep within some of these mountains, a beast had remained dormant for thousands of years, sleeping silently, waiting to be awakened. Horses ran across the desert as large groups of men shouted, heading toward V's Duthrak to face their gods. In Meereen and other slaver cities, the slave owners continued their luxurious lives, keeping many slaves to serve them. Farther east, the culture was very different from Westeros or even Essos. Rice fields stretched for thousands of square kilometers, with people wearing bamboo hats working to harvest and place the grains in straw baskets on their backs, continuing this practice for hours. A group of horses suddenly passed by them, heading toward a large city in the distance. They wore strange armor with military helmets very different from what was used by soldiers in Westeros, and their swords were curved. They rode into the city, passing through the gates where spearmen stood guard, allowing them entry. They rode through the city until they spotted a large castle in the center. They quickly entered and proceeded inside. They were greeted by a person who came to meet them. The three samurai quickly bowed to this person, a woman covered in many scarves to keep her body concealed. "Princess Kazuki Hiyori," they said as the woman nodded. "Come, my father is waiting for you," she said as they followed her into the Japanese-style castle. There, a man sat on the floor in a room, watching them attentively as they bowed once more. "Lord Shimura," the man said. "Shogun-sama," the samurai greeted. "Sit, let's talk." The Shogun of ET said calmly that IT was a month at sea when they finally began to see the 45-meter Titan in the distance. "So small? I prefer the statue of our king at the entrance of Artica," Tormund exclaimed on the ship as they approached the continent closer and closer. "I agree with you," Arya murmured beside him while looking for Jon, talking with the ship's captain. "Give the order for everyone to stop now. We've come too close, and the city must be on alert thinking we're going to attack them," Jon said as he saw the ships at sea looking quite scared with 500 ships stopping in front of Braavos with Artican flags. The order was mimicked as the ships began to slow down, even though the Titan of Braavos was at the end of the horizon in front of them. The main ship began to break away along with another 19 ships, following the lead. "Let's see what we will find in this city," Jon commented as Ygritte approached him. "I'll finally have a journey without problems," she murmured as Arya walked ahead of them, demanding her new sword with an arrogant look while Jon raised an eyebrow. While the 20 ships headed for the city, another 30 ships broke away from the fleet to the south, following Jon's mission to speak with the Martells. As the group of ships was approaching, many ships in the waters saw them and all, without exception, fled to the city's port as quickly as possible. With news that the Articans were arriving in the city, even at the statue that housed some men prepared to defend the city, they quickly went into panic with the sea being filled by all those hundreds of ships while they had stopped in the middle of the water, as some continued towards them. Quickly, a raven was sent directly to the Sea Lord of Braavos, who was in his mansion delighting in his food and talking with some bankers about city matters and gossips. The main topic being, ironically, the movement of the Articans. After all, after the war, they disappeared from the sea going beyond the wall, and was discussing ways to try to curb this threat in case they came to attack him or become enemies. "Can we fight with so many ships if we fight them?" the banker asked with a cautious tone. "I don't know. You saw their weapons. Can we fight against that?" The Sea Lord murmured. "Maybe we can create an alliance and pay for their weapons. We can offer something big." One of the bankers spoke. "Well, that might be." Before the Sea Lord could finish his sentence, a man dressed in exotic clothes and bald, reminding Varys from Westeros, entered the place with an urgent face, and despite the Sea Lord being displeased with this, there must have been some explanation with the look of the man. "Sea Lord, it's urgent. The Artican fleet is in our waters." He spoke with the warning paper from the guards. "What did you say?" The Sea Lord quickly stood up along with the bankers with urgent expressions on their faces. "Should we close the city? Are they going to attack us?" A banker said with a worried tone. "Let's first see what they want. What are their moves? I hope they are not bringing 200 ships into our port, right? We have some advantage at the foot of the statue. Only some number can pass." He spoke as they thought they would have some time if they were their enemies. "Sea Lord," the eunuch said with a worried tone as his lord looked at him, seeing that he had not finished. "The message doesn't speak of 200 ships." The Lord of Braavos quickly looked at the paper while reading. Twice the ships, or even triple, from 400 to 600 ships stopped at sea. What madness is this? He couldn't help but murmur a bit scared by that number of ships. How is this possible? Did they have so many ships hidden in the north? The bankers couldn't help but look at that alarmed. "It doesn't matter now. There are at least 20 ships heading for the port. We should see what they want." Sea Lord replied, while the other bankers were nodding. "Maybe it's business, you know." One of the men replied, while the owner of that place nodded. "I'm sure the Iron Bank would love to talk to them if they're here for that. So it's better to prepare a reception for them. I would go to the port personally to receive the Artican. I doubt we could resist their weapons. So it's better to hope they're here to negotiate." The Sea Lord ordered. The bankers quickly headed to the Iron Bank while the Sea Lord took his best guard and a group of men to the port. And it didn't take long for the news to spread through the city, while everyone panicked due to the rumors they all knew about the Articans, and people screamed and ran through the streets. "Guards, don't let this spread. Make sure people don't do anything stupid." The Sea Lord exclaimed from his horse while he rode, protected by the city, and the city guards quickly tried to contain the more agitated population as they increased each time they got close to the port. The real chaos was at the port, while ships loading goods onto their ships quickly picked up the pace as men shouted orders and cursed at each other in every possible language. They hurried and didn't want to be in the middle of the conflict, while all eyes fell to the feet of the statue, where 20 ships with blue snowflake flags headed for the port. "They are coming. We need to prepare. Grab your weapons. We should take shelter in the city. Forget the goods." Exclamations continued throughout the port as sailors took up swords or any weapon. Men locked themselves on ships, and others ran to the city, while the line at the entrance had drastically increased. "Clear the way. We need to receive the Articans." the Sea Lord exclaimed as his guards quickly joined the city patrol to clear a path for them to reach the port. It was after a while that the Sea Lord finally arrived at the port, looking at the ships while waiting for the arrival of the Articans. Meanwhile, another group arrived at the port, wearing clothes of one of the many houses that were at the port and which belonged to Westeros, while they were doing business in the city at this moment. Everyone was surprised by the arrival of the Articans, and more so than the others. After all, there were only a few at the port who were calm, while most were in panic. The Westerosis were on a higher level after the Articans devastated their lands. But this last lord was dressed to the Manderlys, and the commander of this group was none other than Wireless Manderly himself, who had heard about the Articans and followed to the port to see them and understand what their intentions were after more than 2 moons inactive. His gaze fell on the ships and quickly returned to his men. "Stay alert. Prepare for any dispute. I want a group with me. We need to talk to Ned's son," he spoke as they prepared to try to meet with the approaching ships. Meanwhile, Jon and his family passed through the legs of the great statue and continued looking at the city with the busy and frightened port in front of them. Braavos was an ancient city with a design different from any city in Westeros, but no less than any Jon had visited, not even Old Town. Many considered Braavos the most important commercial point of the known world, where all places gathered to exchange goods. A part of the port was already empty while ships tried to go around them, believing that staying was not a good choice, while Jon didn't seem to care. "You really made quite a bad impression on these Southerners. They fear you." Ygritte couldn't help but murmur. After all, she wasn't in the battles when they returned to Artica, so she was surprised by what she heard. "It's good they're afraid." Arya spoke beside her with the same arrogant tone. The first ships began to dock while the main ship took a place further back, finally stopping while thousands of eyes stared at them there. The port had been closed off while a group passed by the guards and by the clothes. Jon quickly recognized him as the Sea Lord of Braavos. "It seems we are treated with some respect. Lower the plank. Let's talk to our possible hosts," Jon advised as the giants moved a huge board, scaring everyone below with those 4-meter men being seen for the first time by everyone. Jon followed, wearing his Elden Metal armor in black and red colors, with his dragon and wolf emblazoned on the chest. It glimmered slightly in a green hue with the reflection of the sun due to the magical metal. Jon, now of adult age in this world, had an imposing stature with a muscular body, quite different from when he first wore this armor at 11 named days, when he visited Winterfell, standing out like a hero from stories. He was the first to disembark from the ship, descending the plank, while his men followed soon after to act as his guards and ensure his safety. The Sea Lord, along with his group, approached him looking not with disdain, but with fear and caution. Jon calmly waited for the men to approach, noticing there was much more respect in Braavos than he had seen in Dorne on his first visit. "Hello, dear visitors." The best-dressed man, who was the Sea Lord, approached alongside a middle-aged man, who carried a thin sword by his side. Jon noted that he was quick and experienced while keeping a hand on the weapon to use it to protect his lord at any moment, but he did not care about that now, as he addressed the man who spoke to him. "You must be the Sea Lord of Braavos. I am Jon Artica, king of the kingdom beyond the wall." "Artica," Jon introduced himself calmly. "It is an honor to receive you here, Jon Artica, and monarch of the kingdom so many of us have heard about." The Sea Lord responded cautiously. "We just did not expect your visit. Otherwise, our reception would have been much grander." He spoke, despite wishing he had never seen this group in his life, but he had to maintain a due respect because of how dangerous they are. "You must forgive us for that. We are returning to the sea to negotiate with Essos. Braavos is the first city we have come to on this route. There is no way to send a raven, otherwise we would have informed you of our arrival." Jon spoke, understanding the man's position. "I understand," the Sea Lord said, now with a more pleasant tone. Jon was not as hostile as he had imagined he would be, so he found himself speaking more openly and sincerely with the Artican. "Have you come to negotiate your products?" he asked. Jon nodded. "Yes, that, and I would like to talk with the Iron Bank about a proposal," Jon said, and the man looked a bit surprised but had something to discuss with Jon before they continued. "Before that, King Artican, You are aware that our situation is a bit uncertain, right? The man began. I do not mean to offend, but the city is in panic with your presence and that of more than 400 ships in the middle of the sea. They're like this because of the attack on Old Town, the destruction of the Red Wine Fleet, and your victory at sea against the Royal Fleet. Your stories are worthy of songs and already circulate through all the cities of Essos. But this also brings fear. You can understand that the situation is not very easy for us, right? He spoke with a cautious tone, waiting for Jon's response. I know how you feel, Sea Lord. We came here with a proposal for peace. Westeros asked us to act that way. If you do not believe in that, it's okay. We will take our ships and leave, parting in peace. As long as you do not try something unforgivable like locking us up and threatening us, we can be friends or even neutral. Jon responded. After all, Artica was just defending itself from aggressions, albeit without mercy when it happened. The man looked for a while a bit surprised by his response, but soon a small smile formed on his face. He knew very well what happened in Old Town, thanks to the informants that Braavos had in Westeros. It was not hard to know through some that those who provoked the Articans were the Maesters of the Citadel with the men of faith. Although he did not fully agree with the decisions of that group, having already prepared troops to attack the city as soon as they docked in the port, they could still understand why they did what they did. Do not make a hasty decision. The only thing Braavos wants is good trade partners and for everything to occur in peace. As long as you guarantee peace while no one offends you in Braavos, we are interested in hearing you, King Artica. You spoke of the Iron Bank. Why not accompany me to it, where we can discuss important matters? He spoke, keeping his bow as deep as possible. That sounds good. We can talk. Yes, Sea Lord of Braavos. Jon responded with a tone of respect. I'm sure that Braavos and Artica can be good trade partners, he said. After all, the quality of Artican products is no secret to anyone. If we can secure a deal, there will surely be a good profit margin for selling them to the city and to the traders who arrive at the port, which will strengthen the city and its trade. He said, Great. Jon nodded as he looked at his men, raising his hand to get the attention of the men on the boat before speaking to them. Call everyone. We're going into the city to accompany the Sea Lord, and the rest will stay at the port to protect the ships. Understood? Jon asked as everyone began to move on the main ship. Ygritte started to disembark from the ship with Arya at her side, and his Minister of Trade and Coin, followed closely by the guards and giants exiting last, while the Sea Lord, along with his men, swallowed hard at the sight of those huge creatures armored in Elden metal, lacking the courage to tell them not to bring those things into the city. Giants were intimidating wherever they went. Lead the way, Sea Lord, Jon requested as the man finally snapped out of his daze and moved forward with his men. Clear the way for us, he demanded, as the city patrol that kept the curious away from the Artican ships in conversation quickly moved to the open city entrance, moving the crowd aside to let them pass. Jon and everyone continued through, while the people let out sighs of relief, seeing that there was no conflict, as Jon moved into the city with guards clearing space in the crowd. The 8 heavily armed giants were visible to all, and the ground seemed to tremble with each step they took, following the Artican group, with the population quickly backing away and pointing at them quite frightened, seeing a creature that had been a legend until a few years ago. Jon noticed Lord Manderly, whom he hadn't seen since he had visited Winterfell, trying to talk to them, but being prevented by guards from approaching. Jon ended up ignoring him. He wouldn't talk to Lord Manderly now, maybe later, since he was curious about what had happened in Winterfell after his fiery visit. You have a beautiful sword there, young lady. The man who had been by the Sea Lord's side the entire time couldn't help but comment, looking at Darksister with interest. After all, it was a famous sword that everyone claimed was in Jon Artica's hands. But the Artican king no longer used it, and the man searched until he found it on the girl's waist, due to his fascination with the slender weapon, something he liked due to his style with speed. You like it? This is my sword, the same used by Visenya Targaryen. I wield it as if it were part of my arm. She spoke with her usual arrogant confidence. Ha! I would like to see that. The man responded, finding it amusing how confidently the child spoke. I haven't introduced you to him. The Sea Lord interjected while looking at Jon. "This is the man known as the first sword of Braavos, Syrio Farrell," he said. "I am sure his skills would be impressive to you, Lady Stark," the man responded, easily recognizing Arya. "That sounds interesting. If I beat him, would I become the first sword of Braavos?" she asked with an excited tone. "Haha, only if you want to spend your years working here. But you'll have to beat me first. I'll be waiting for that, Lady Arya," Syrio Farrell spoke with an amused tone. Jon remained silent as they continued through the city, crossing bridges in the middle of the city, connecting one part with another, while people followed them to continue watching them, until they came upon a large structure in front of them, surrounded by walls and heavily armed men, much more than was found at the port. After all, this place housed millions of kilos of gold. "It looks like the Senate of Artica," Ygritte murmured next to Jon, as he nodded, looking at the place with an ancient and grand appearance. The gates were opened as soon as they arrived by order of the Sea Lord, while the guards welcomed the Artican group to pass. Jon finally faced the largest money depot of the known world, the Iron Bank, in front of him. Jon cracked a big smile at this, while the other Articans were with him, looking surprised. "Here will begin our negotiations," he whispered as he moved forward. The Articans were quickly greeted by a group of 12 men at the entrance, surrounded by guards, all very well dressed, who awaited them with a certain elegance of Essos, but not as much as those slave leaders who were so fond of jewels and earrings with pincers. As Jon approached, the man at the front of the 12 stepped forward. He bowed his head and looked at Jon carefully. "Welcome to the Iron Bank, King of Artica," the man said, as soon as Jon was close enough, before continuing. "It is an honor to meet you and see you at our prestigious bank, Jon Artica. My name is Tycho Nestoris. I am a representative of the Iron Bank, and I am here to welcome you. These are our 12 magnificent men, known as the key holders. They take care of the entire Iron Bank and make the biggest decisions. And they are here to greet you with all due respect," he spoke. It was obvious that they were afraid of Jon, especially considering he had 500 ships anchored outside in the sea. They prefer to treat him with respect rather than make him an enemy. Jon was not surprised by the information about the 12 key holders. It was something he already knew very well through Greensight, studying how the economy of the known world worked. They were the most influential and powerful men in Braavos. They controlled several local trade companies and were those who made the biggest decisions in the bank, such as whom to charge higher or lower interest rates, or whether to lend or not. Jon cracked a respectful smile at them. "Well, I'm impressed with the reception. Nice to meet you too, who, along with the Sea Lord, are the most powerful lords of Braavos," Jon said calmly, while everyone nodded. "Let me introduce all the key holders, King of Artica," Tycho said, playing the role of connector between the two groups, and began introducing each of the 12. They responded with a nod to Jon, and some even with a slight wave. Now that introductions are over, I'm sure a private room would be more suitable for such an important meeting. Tycho Nestoris continued speaking after they had greeted each other. "Bring bread and salt for King Artica, so we can make him comfortable in our humble bank," he said in a calm tone, while another Braavosi man brought the bread and salt. After the guest ritual was completed, they began to enter the bank. "There are some courtesans present. I'm sure your wife and sister will be quite comfortable accompanying them," the Sea Lord said. "Please, I want them to stay only with our guards," Jon spoke. After all, he didn't want his family mingling with the city's luxury prostitutes. "That's fine, King of Artica. It won't be a problem." The Lord of Braavos nodded, respecting Jon's decision. "They will be led to a pleasant place where they can wait while we finish the meeting," one of the key holders spoke as Jon nodded. The group began to separate, while guards along with Ygritte and Arya and 10 royal guards moved to one side, and Jon along with his ministers and another 15 royal guards moved along with the Sea Lord and his guard with the 12 key holders, Tycho, and the bank guards. Jon wouldn't put Arya in this moment to negotiate with these men, as this was the most important negotiation he would have on his journey since he started moving from Artica to Westeros, and doubted another would surpass it. So he didn't want to offend these men. "So, these men help you organize the powerful and mysterious Artica?" The Sea Lord looked at the 2 men behind Jon. "After all, they will represent Artica through me. It's good that you already know them," for I am sure we can bear good fruit from this negotiation. Jon spoke. I am Gavrin, Minister of Coin and Wealth of the Kingdom. The man introduced himself to the Sea Lord while the keyholders looked on with interest, as this man controlled the finances of the new kingdom rising in this world, with great financial power. This beside me is Junli, Minister of Trade. Gavrin introduced his colleague, soon after while the mentioned minister nodded to everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you, the Sea Lord said with a respectful tone. You all know each other very well. Due to the good business everyone benefited from today, Jon did not miss the opportunity to speak a few words of the introduction. Of course, King of Artica. As your words suggest, we could derive good negotiations. One of the keyholders said, as the group followed him further into a room with an open view to the sea, yet completely isolated from any other location. The guards will wait outside. A keyholder spoke as both the Braavosi guards and the first sort of Braavos, along with the Artican guards, waited, the latter carrying a box to be called upon. Jon entered and quickly surveyed the area, using some animals he encountered along the way and even his eagles that flew outside. It was clear that there were some people attempting to eavesdrop, and Jon identified someone below them and another person hanging outside. The Iron Bank would not allow anyone to spy on them, especially during such a high-caliber meeting with all the keyholders present, so they were placed there on purpose. A stone table was situated in the middle of the room. The 12 keyholders sat on one side with the Sea Lord, while Jon and his 2 ministers sat on the other, with the Minister of Commerce and the Minister of Coin bringing bags with documents while Jon remained there in his armor. Tycho had accompanied them inside, before taking his leave. I will be waiting outside for any eventuality, Tycho spoke before leaving the room. As soon as he left, one of the keyholders was the first to speak. King of Artica, we have been told that you are interested in establishing trade with Braavos, bringing your famous products from Artica. Ah, yes, that sounds great, another keyholder said. We have heard much about your products, and it seems that Dorne still maintains the trade you established. He said with interest. Yes, I am willing to sell many things to Braavos, and I am sure that you would be interested in my products as a new source of revenue for you, Jon said with a small smile. Interesting. Might Braavos be the only city you negotiate with in Essos? Another keyholder spoke, implying that Jon would only sell to Braavos. But Jon shook his head. Braavos is the first city we visited in Essos, but that does not mean we won't visit others. After all, we want to create a maritime trade network with all the port cities on this continent, Jon responded. Well, that's a bit disheartening, a fourth keyholder spoke. I'm sure we can think more about this, he hinted to Jon. It was obvious that they wanted to monopolize the products of Artica. Jon understood their side. After all, they are merchants and want the highest profit possible. But they should also understand Jon's side, as merchants and, primarily, as bankers who also aim for profit. That is out of the question, Jon said, and the keyholders exchanged glances as they seemed to be communicating among themselves and with the Sea Lord, a kind of technique for their decisions in front of third parties. His ministers remained silent, with Jon watching them, after exchanging looks and signals among themselves. Everyone's attention returned to Jon. Well, I believe you are a determined man, and there is no point in insisting on this. But Braavos is interested in trade with Artica, and we would love to see your products here, especially the ice. After all, we are in an arid land, and ever since you began supplying ice to Dorne many moons ago, it has become a craze in the kingdom as we've heard, and we know they are looking for more after their stock ended there. I'm sure they're quite excited about the idea of you delivering a new shipment. One of the keyholders spoke. Lucky for them that you won't be negotiating with anyone else in Westeros after what happened. Another cautiously added, speaking of the conflict, do we have any guarantee that we won't be attacked either? Another keyholder spoke, with a more questioning tone than the others. Don't take me wrong, King of Artica, but there's a fleet of 500 ships, far more than what you used to attack Westeros. We just want to ensure that nothing will happen to us. Jon merely smiled at that moment. It depends. What led me to attack Westeros was the folly of the Maesters. They put me in a room, tried to intimidate me, renounce my own gods, and even my own family. So, I killed every one of them without any pity. But rest assured, gentlemen key holders, I only attack when necessary, and I hope it stays that way. After all, I see that man next to the window and another below us. I pity that this might change if they suddenly do more than just listen to our conversation. Jon spoke, his tone becoming less pleasant as he glanced at each of the bankers, each feeling a chill. My lord, one of the key holders stood up. I apologize if we have offended. We have no intention of attacking you. After all, we have important information at this meeting. We just keep everything for them to pass on the recorded reports. But I'm sure they are already leaving, the key holders spoke. The next moment, they heard a splash of water, as if the man really had jumped into the water, while Jon observed through the eagles outside and also noticed what was below them disappear. As I said, gentlemen, Artica is open for business. As long as there is no aggression on your part, we will be good friends, Jon declared, opening up his tone to be more friendly while smiling. Yes, King of Artica. Many of them quickly responded, trying to rectify their previous error. I don't mean to be offensive, but as one of the key holders, there are some issues I want to confirm with you regarding our trade. The same key holder, with a questioning tone, spoke again. Can we count on you, King of Artica? After all, once we start our businesses, we will probably need weekly restock from Artica. But what concerns us is your war with Westeros. We've heard about a whole group coming north to attack your kingdom, he commented. Just a little more than 15,000 men, gentlemen. These men will be decimated by half even before they get to see the kingdom. And if they arrive, they will be easily destroyed against the Artican forces. We control the greatest power north of the wall, and my people easily know how to fight on that hostile terrain. If Westeros really desires a war with us, Jon spoke with an indifferent tone and continued. Know that Artica has no enemies, he said, as all the key holders nodded. Moreover, if this is a concern for you, I would like to deposit a sum of money in this bank, Jon concluded, and this immediately raised all eyebrows. You want to do this, King of Artica? How much are we talking about? One of them asked, surprised like his colleagues. Minister of Coin, hand over the papers. Jon ordered his minister. The man quickly opened his bag and took out some documents, handing them to the nearest key holder, who quickly read them, raising his eyebrows as he passed them on to the next. Consequently, all the key holders and the Sea Lord began to read the documents, one after the other, until they communicated with each other with their eyes again. You want to deposit all these thousands of gold dragons in credit in our bank? They asked, stunned, as the amount was immense, also being surprised that Jon was richer than they had thought, even after all the trade with thousands he had done in Westeros. This would make you a shareholder like us. Exactly, gentlemen. You have never had an exact number of key holders. It has always varied from time to time. Why not have a 13th key holder at the Iron Bank? Jon declared with a calm tone. They looked at each other once more. Well, this is unexpectedly not an easy decision, Jon Artica, especially for a foreign kingdom, one of them commented. After all, they did not expect such a proposal like this, and allowing Jon to invest so much money was almost as if he was starting to take over Braavos through the economy. This was something they did not want, but there were also many benefits they could gain from this situation. However, it was still not a decision to be taken lightly. King of Artica, we can deal with this later. After all, this is not something we can discuss superficially. Therefore, we would like you to give us some time, one of the key holders requested. That's fine. After all, I'm aware of something like this. So let's stay a few days in Braavos, Jon said. Although such a discussion would normally take weeks, Jon needed to travel to an unknown world on this trip and return to Artica as quickly as possible. After all, he had children and a kingdom still to manage. Very well, sir. We will discuss a bit and give you an answer. But, if you wish, we can already start trading, another key holder said, as Jon nodded. His Minister of Commerce also took some document from his bag, placing them on the table before going to open the door. Guards brought in the large boxes they had brought inside the bank. Jon quickly began to negotiate all his products along with his ministers, presenting them to the men who eagerly looked and sampled. Jon maintained the same trading style he had negotiated in Dorne and the Reach, establishing a pricing policy for the key holders to work with even allowing the common people access to some of his products, mainly ice and some cheaper drinks. After all, Jon would have a much better turnover, and the factories in Artica were ready to meet this demand, even if it needed to serve all the coastal cities of Essos and even Westeros, if that were possible in time. In the end, they made progress in negotiations, but nothing was finalized yet, as the men wanted to insist on prices and Jon remained firm, already accustomed to dealing with such people as he had done in Westeros. In the end, they reached a good initial consensus while they ate and drank Artican food and touched his silk and other exotic products along with cigars. There is also a new trade that I did not do with the south of Westeros. After all, they do not need it, and after our fight, I do not care much what they think, Jon began in a calm tone. The Reach, besides not fulfilling their agreement after he had paid them, Jon could screw them over in a way that no one else did. What would that be? The Sea Lord asked curiously. After all the known products of Artica were exactly there. It is nothing less than food, fruits, and vegetables, Jon declared, making them look surprised. Can Artica supply products to Braavos? One of them asked, astonished. Yes, you don't think that just because we come from beyond the wall, we cannot reproduce our food. And I assure you, my friends, you will receive so much food that you will no longer need Westeros with high prices. Moreover, you could even sell to the north, which may be smaller than the Reach, and the Riverlands sell to the kingdom, making a large profit. That is until you manage contracts with the north itself, Jon declared. Braavos, like all the cities of Essos, needed to import food from Westeros due to their arid lands, besides offering a product even cheaper than Westeros delivers. This would be a blow to the Reach and the Riverlands, who supply outside of Westeros, and if Braavos managed to resell to the north, because Jon believed it would be very difficult for him to sell himself. It would be a final blow to these kingdoms, and the loss would be catastrophic on their high profit margins. That certainly catches attention. Can we see your products that you grow in your fields? They asked, and Jon nodded. We left them on the ships, but we will bring them over these next 3 days. That's great. Then let's conclude our meeting for today. I'm sure we have already accomplished a lot and are starting our future and solid commercial partnership. One of the key holders spoke with great satisfaction. Let's go then. Keep these samples and taste as much as you want. Jon spoke while the key holders were delighting themselves with the drinks mixed with ice, enjoying the pleasure of drinking something cold in that heat. King of Artica, may I invite you to my mansion? I'm sure it will be a good place for you and your family to stay in the coming days. My family and I will treat you with the respect befitting your position, the Sea Lord offered, being an opportunity to solidify his relationship with someone so powerful. Very well, Sea Lord, we will be accompanying you. Jon spoke at the end as the man nodded, and they left the room with the key holders having a big meeting at this moment to decide what to do after everything they had heard. Jon decided to head straight to the Sea Lord's house while he ordered some of his ships to be steered to the closest point to the mansion by sea, since the city was entirely surrounded by waters. It was quick. Jon met his wife and Arya as soon as he left the meeting room, quickly informing them that the meeting had ended as they finally exited the building and headed north. The Iron Bank was in the north of the city, but not at the highest point, since this place belonged to the Sea Lord's own palace, which was beside the Iron Bank, so they saw it as soon as they stepped out of the bank's doors and headed there. There was a huge tower when the sea became visible to him on the east side of the city. Jon saw Arya looking intently at it. Do you know what that is? Jon asked with a smile. Yes, they're the city's defense towers, as there are also walls to protect the city. With its only entrance being under the Titan, these towers are high to combat potential enemies and are scattered throughout the city to take advantage of their height and protection while their archers are spread out. Arya spoke quickly while Jon nodded. Exactly, Jon replied, pleased that his sister had remembered that. And in a fight, what's the best way to beat this city? Jon wanted to know what she thought about it. It's simple. We knock down the Titan by blowing up its legs and destroy everything else, Arya said, sticking her tongue out at Jon. Well, I think you are too accustomed to wildfire, Jon murmured as Ygritte laughed beside them. At that moment, the Sea Lord was in front, and only his guards were there, so he didn't hear their conversation. Jon, there's the Black and White House in this city. Do you think they would accept me to be an assassin? She asked playfully. I don't know, maybe, but you would have to swap that sword for daggers. Jon shrugged. No, I'm not giving up this sword. Arya responded immediately. You would have to live in Braavos, and I heard you'd have to renounce all your family and name. Ygritte also spoke while Arya's face grew increasingly displeased. Forget it. She pouted in the end before turning back to Jon with curious eyes. How would you deal with an assassin in Jon? Arya asked. These assassins are very good. Your chance of success is very good with your skills and planning. So I can use my animals to identify them. Besides that, I believe they're deadly to almost all people in this world. Jon thought a bit and responded sincerely. They could mimic the appearance and voice. His advantage was that the animals could alert him. After all, their instincts are much stronger than the disguise of these faceless assassins. They continued talking as they finally entered the mansion with a large courtyard. Welcome to my humble palace. Come, I want to introduce my wife and children, he said as they approached the family. After the introductions, they were escorted to a high-standard place near the main rooms. You can make yourselves at home in the palace. I'll leave a man in charge to guide you through the place. I would just like to invite you to a banquet honoring your arrival in this kingdom. King of Artica, he spoke while Jon nodded. Essos seemed much more welcoming than Westeros. The nobles here weren't as proud at least, or that might have changed after the chaos he created on the other continent. In the end, Jon was in his room since it was already mid-afternoon and the banquet would be earlier, so he left his men to handle everything. After all, 3 ships had come to the port next to the Sea Lord's palace, which, as usual, Jon distributed his products to the party guests, where he passed to make everyone better acquainted. It was a way to promote them. Jon also took care of his security, while keeping some snakes hidden among some boxes to enter holes looking for secret entrances behind any spy as usual, but found nothing here. It seemed that the Sea Lord tried his best not to offend him. Anyway, he spent some time with Ygritte, while his wife continued to gaze at the beauty of Braavos from the high point where they were, having the view of the entire city from their balcony, with many giant structures standing out, especially those isolated in the middle of the water. Everything seemed normal until his guard knocked on the door. What is it? Jon asked while reading a book and drinking some Arctican wine. My king, there is a man here on behalf of the Sea Lord informing that there is a noble from the north wanting to speak with you. He heard the voice of one of his guards as he raised an eyebrow. Noble from the north. Jon murmured and went to the door, opening it to see the Braavosi man in front of his guards. King of Artica, he murmured as he almost bowed. Speak, man. Who is the noble? Jon demanded. Lord Manderly. He has come to our gates asking for an audience with you and your sister, he said. So he came all the way here? Jon murmured, already spotting him at the port. Is there a room where we can meet? Jon asked the man as he nodded. Yes, I can arrange a private room on the first floor of the palace, he said. Call Arya. I will be out shortly, Jon instructed as he went back into the room to put away his things. In a moment, he emerged in an unassuming outfit, but it was in his armor that he had disembarked from the ship before the first negotiation, accompanied by Ygritte and meeting Arya outside in a black dress, still with her sword at her waist. Let's see what he wants, Jon said as they went to the first floor and proceeded to a room that the palace man had arranged for them, and Jon confirmed that there were no uninvited ears while they settled on a sofa with their guards behind them, waiting for the Braavosi to call Manderly in question. Wireless Manderly was at the entrance when he was finally called in. When he was at the port and tried to speak with Ned's son, he had no chance with the men of Braavos stopping him, so he could only see them from afar. He was lucky those giants weren't beside the group. Otherwise, he wouldn't see any of them, while he saw the king of Artica along with the Sea Lord entering the city on horseback while their guards surrounded them. It was still strange for him watching the group advancing further into the city, realizing that Ned's son had indeed established such a powerful kingdom that when he first heard of it in Winterfell, he didn't quite believe it, and even mocked Ned internally, despite the respect for the Stark, that a boy had made a kingdom in the north. But now what he could see was shocking, that an entire fleet of 500 ships with at least 20,000 Arcticans, much larger than those 150 ships that wreaked havoc in the south, and these 500 were outside of Braavos, keeping away all ships coming to the city and others fleeing, believing that it could be an attack. His belief that John Arctica had abducted his sister died when he heard the rumors that came from the south and the songs about the wolf of the north as they exhaled the ballad speaking of Arya Stark, highlighting her bravery, beauty, and intelligence in her encounters in the south. She was very well trained and seemed to be a better lady than his sister if the rumors were true. Now he was going to meet with him finally as he entered the palace, where he ended up coming several times when he could have a meeting with the Sea Lord about business and matters of white. After all, he was an important client for Braavos, being the richest house in the north and the only one with such a powerful port. His goal was very simple there, to take Arya Stark back to the north as Ned always wanted. So he hoped to have a good, friendly conversation and leave with the girl from there. As soon as he entered the room, he faced John Arctica sitting in the middle with 2 women and several guards. It was easy to recognize him by his green eyes, and he was no longer the boy he had met in Winterfell. He had grown tall, much more than his age would suggest, with a distinctly crafted demeanor of a warrior who, according to rumors, had defeated anyone who dared to challenge him on his journey to the south, humiliating each of his opponents, whether it was the Red Viper of Dorne, the Kingslayer, the Mountain Barristan Selmy, and even the king himself, defeated one by this boy. Wallace would have laughed if someone said a 16-year-old boy could defeat all these adversaries, who were famous throughout the 7 kingdoms, in just 1 year, becoming the best sword to have passed through Westeros since the fall of the Targaryens. After all, there was Arthur Dayne, whom many said could surpass John Arctica if he were alive. Beside him was a very beautiful woman with almost flame-like red hair. She must be his second wife. The brunette he heard was traveling with him was not present, and on his other side was Ned's daughter, who made Wallace wonder if she really was the daughter of his lord. The girl would be extremely beautiful when she became a woman, and that would not take many years to happen. The 3 stared at him as he didn't know quite what to say, while only 4 Manderly guards accompanied him. Compared to the warriors with shining metal, he felt a bit embarrassed by his men merely wearing leather. "King of Arctica," he commented, finally breaking the silence, thinking that this was the best way to deal with them. After all, he did not want to also feel the fury of those 500 ships attacking White Harbor and devastating the city after what he heard about how he acted in the south. "Lord Wireless Manderly," John replied calmly without standing up while the 3 remained silent. "Would you like to sit?" John cracked a small smile, pointing to the empty Braavosi sofa in front of him. Yes, of course." Wireless, still a bit stiff, nodded, sitting down before turning back to John. "I hear that your kingdom beyond the wall has grown much," he said, trying to start the conversation. "Are you speaking from a military standpoint, or my trade and wealth, or is it my growth in so few years?" John asked with an amused smile. He couldn't deny it was good to see a noble looking at him with so much caution. "I would say all 3 at the same time. King of Arctica, when I saw you at Winterfell, I never thought we would be here discussing something like this and how powerful you are." He admitted, "Many things happen, Lord Manderly. The future is always uncertain and anything can happen. But even so, I always make sure to look after my people, with a prosperous future for Arctica," John replied with a smile. "I understand. Wise are your words. Your story." Manderly didn't know how to finish. "I don't know how they will tell my story in the future, Lord Manderly," John interrupted him before continuing. "But I certainly will be satisfied if they talk about how a boy of 8 named days who cleaned the stables with horse dung in Winterfell became a king who leads tens of thousands of men, dwarfs, and giants. I will be very satisfied." John spoke. "I think you are right," Manderly said. "Let's stop talking about this. Now tell me, Lord Manderly, and what would you like to discuss with the most hated man in the north?" I said, making the man frown a bit. "I don't think you are the most hated. King of Arctica. People just raised a misconception about you. And, as you can see, your sister is fine. But still, you're loved by many with your stories of how you helped the North when you were just a child," he spoke. John never captured me, do you hear? Arya decided to speak this time with an accusatory tone to the man, while he nodded. "I know that, as I said before. It was a misconception on the part of some." He spoke carefully before, looking at Arya. "And I'm here to deliver a message from your father, Lady Arya," he said as Arya quickly softened her anger. Arya looked towards John, who shrugged in response. "You can talk to him freely, Arya," he said while she looked at Manderly with suspicion. "Speak," she demanded, as the man couldn't help but notice her sword in her hand while she was unable to rest it on the sofa. He quickly recognized it as the legendary sword by the pommel shaped like an egg and dragon wings for the guard. He tried to ignore the shock of seeing Dark Sister in Arya's hands before turning back to the girl. "Your father wants to see you again. He asked me to tell you that he and your family want you back, that he wishes to see you at home after all these years." He spoke with a cautious tone. This seemed to stir something in Arya as she shook her head at the end. "I will return, but not now. And tell my father, if I return and hear someone say that Jon kidnapped me years ago, I will cut off the head of anyone who utters those words," she exclaimed, while Jon looked at her with disapproval, thinking that was quite extreme. Arya missed her father and the others, but she still wanted to be with Jon. "But your family," Lord Manderly tried to argue. "After this trip, Arya will return to Winterfell," Jon stated. "Tell my father that in a year, I will be back. After all, we are heading east. It will be a long journey," Arya said quickly with a smile. "I understand." Wylis had no leverage here, so he simply nodded, unable to argue further. "About Winterfell, how is House Stark?" Jon asked, no longer calling him father, wanting to know what had happened since he visited Winterfell with Aragorn. Despite the discomfort, Lord Manderly turned back to Jon. "Things haven't changed much over the years, but there was an incident more than a moon ago where a mysterious storm circled the castle and covered the castle in snow, and a sound that some say was a monster attacking the Starks. Others talk of thunder, but most believe it was the old god speaking. Rumors are circulating in the north that the Starks had angered the gods or something like that," he said, while Arya and even Serena looked at Jon with wide eyes at that moment after hearing that, wondering what Jon had done. Manderly continued, "But Lord Stark has changed, so they say. It said he was in the middle of the courtyard when the gods roared. It seemed like he heard their demands. Since then, he barely speaks with his wife or even spends time with his family, while he locks himself in his solar every day since the incident. Nobody knows exactly what Lord Stark is thinking, but many say that the old god spoke directly to him," he finished. Jon sighed upon hearing this. "I see," he said, as he was responsible for all this mess. "Anyway, tell Lord Stark that we will talk again one day," he said vaguely as Manderly looked confused at him. "Just say that and he will understand," Jon clarified, since he did not plan to go to Winterfell with Arya. Despite doubts about this, Wylis just nodded, planning to pass these mysterious words to his lord. The man didn't know what else to say. After all, he couldn't demand anything here, and as Arya did not plan to return to Winterfell, Manderly couldn't deny he wanted to know exactly what Jon was negotiating here with 500 ships. After all, the city still received him, and he was here being a special guest of the Sea Lord. "King of Artica, may I ask something?" he asked suddenly with caution. Jon seemed to read his mind at that moment. "If you're wondering what I plan to do with the North, you don't need to worry about your people becoming my enemies. As long as you don't harm my people, I am not your enemy," Jon responded while the man from White Harbor seemed to sigh in relief with that, but Jon hadn't finished thinking about another thing. "Tell me, Lord Manderly, how have you been handling the food stocks in the North? We know we've had the longest summer of the last generations, and the winter always lasts as long as the summer before it. Have you been storing a lot of food to face it?" Jon asked, while Wylis thought for a moment. Despite being surprised by the question, Wylis answered honestly, "We have some stock, but we haven't started buying in bulk," he replied. They hadn't yet made powerful deals with the South. "I see. I doubt the North really buys Arctican food, but that might change with third-party purchases, since one of my deals with this city is a new food supply. I guarantee the price you'll pay with the fixed margin I require to sell to the end customer is much better than what you buy from the Riverlands and the Reach," Jon said. After all, if he sold to Braavos while they could profit, they would resell to the Kingdom of the North, pulling an even lower price or causing the southern kingdoms to lose their sales, leading to their entire harvest spoiling or even have it at lower prices, which is also a significant difference for what they usually earn. After all, they place quite abusive prices since the North had no choice but to buy from them. "You plan to sell food to Braavos?" Wylis was surprised by this. Exactly. We are still negotiating in the coming days, John said, introducing a cheap alternative for food in the market. He didn't do this in Westeros because it could complicate buying his horses in the Reach. Not just a cheaper alternative, but also a greater variety than what they usually consumed. After all, in Arctica, they can have very variable agriculture, and even in winter they can still produce more food, with almost all the grains, fruits, vegetables, and legumes in the world. If that's true, King of Arctica, I see no reason why we wouldn't buy from Braavos. Although I'd prefer to buy from you. Since you're the direct supplier, I can't guarantee this from the other houses. Manderly spoke and recognized how the other houses did not view Jon, especially since Jon had gone to war with the Crown and other important houses of Westeros. Your crown will not be able to say that you are strengthening the enemies with this and tell you about a price that is 1/10 of what you usually buy from the Riverlands and the Reach, Jon said while Lord Manderly's eyes widened at this. The King of Arctica had already looked at the market to see how it operated before this proposal. It was easy to pick up on that in those conversations he had at the banquets in Highgarden, which is why he was always talking to the nobles. After that, Lord Wireless Manderly asked no more questions, as there was nothing more to say. I shall go then, Jon Arctica, to convey your words and Arya's that she will visit them in a year at Winterfell, he said. I am sure Lord Stark will indeed be happy and grateful to hear this. He spoke at the end. Jon nodded as they watched Lord Manderly walk away before starting to rise and return to his women. Well, that's finally over. Now let's get ready, for we have a banquet tonight, he announced as the women nodded and they headed to their room to get ready. The Sea Lord's banquet was not something much more extravagant than what could happen in Artica. After all, Jon's banquets used to bring the entire kingdom together, focusing on the arenas. The Sea Lord's family was greeting the guests, among them the key holders who wouldn't miss it, and even the biggest merchants who were below them, but had a great influence on the trade and decisions of the city of Braavos. As expected, Braavos did not want to become an enemy of Artica as had happened in Westeros. After all, Artica emerged victorious from all the fights. If they had to bet on someone, it would definitely be Artica. So with this respect wanting to be built between them, everyone was present, hoping to show some respect, and the Braavosi could easily get the information about what happened in Westeros and knew the impression of the nobles from the Seven Kingdoms. At this moment, Jon finally approached the entrance as they announced his arrival. With all the hospitality Braavos can provide, we welcome Jon Artica, sovereign of the realm beyond the wall, with his family, he announced as Jon entered dressed in the style of the present nobles, accompanied by Arya and Ygritte, entering the place. Welcome to our banquet, King of Artica. I hope it pleases you. The Sea Lord greeted them. Unlike Westeros, where there were tables in higher places to signal the status of those occupying their chairs, the tables here were all aligned, perhaps because the Sea Lord did not want to belittle anyone. After all, there were many important people here, and a table would hardly be enough, with all the people who command the city and practically the economy of all Essos, and with great influence in Westeros. Jon ended up sitting with the Sea Lord while the key holders surrounded them, not just his family accompanying him. His ministers as important people and keys to the kingdom should accompany him as they shared conversations among themselves. Thank you for the reception. Braavos really knows how to be welcoming. Jon exchanged some kind words with his host, not feeling the malice that was in Westeros here. I don't like how those prostitutes are looking at you. Ygritte murmured by his side as soon as she sat down. Around the hall, some courtesans were with some personal guards, looking directly at Jon as if waiting for an opportunity to talk to him. I'm not interested, Jon said, ignoring those glances. After all, he had no interest in these women, especially women who shared the bed with other men. He ignored the glances and continued eating while talking with the Sea Lord and the key holders at that table, trying to gain their trust with some humor, since his goal was to be a key holder of the Iron Bank, and he had to also be friendly with them without overdoing it. After all, he is still a king. That's interesting. You have different ships. If possible, I would like to take a look when possible. One of the key holders said, interested in the Artican carracks docked in the port, which were very different from common ships. Certainly, that wouldn't be a problem, Jon responded before continuing. I hear that you export wood from Westeros. The king of Artica had a peculiar look. Certainly, king of Artica, mainly from the north. If your negotiations involve your wood, we will be very interested, the Sea Lord himself commented. I took the liberty of asking some men to see your ships, and indeed, your wood is much superior to what we have here. He spoke as Jon nodded. Let's leave that conversation for the next negotiation, Jon said. Certainly. Now let's have fun and enjoy the banquet. Bards, exclaimed the lord of this palace, as music began to fill the air. Couples went to dance on the floor, while Ygritte looked at Jon. Do you want to dance? He smiled, knowing the woman liked to do that, but always pretended otherwise. Jon ended up taking her to the floor while dancing, and those who tried to make Arya go to the floor were all refused. As Jon continued dancing with his wife, he finally stopped for a moment while he was interested in a particular conversation with the Sea Lord. As he proceeded, he was approached by a woman wearing revealing clothes, the very courtesan who found a gap to approach him, while Ygritte immediately looked at him like a hawk as soon as she sat back down with Arya. King of Artica, it's an honor, she began, but Jon immediately interrupted her. I'm busy right now, perhaps another time, Jon said and quickly dodged, continuing his way as his guards followed him through the hall. King of Artica, the Sea Lord was visibly surprised as Jon approached him at this moment. Sea Lord, I would like to have a conversation with you if possible, Jon said while the man was talking to another at that moment. Of course. Could you give us a moment, my lord? He spoke to his colleague, who nodded as he turned back to Jon. Please, King of Artica, follow me, he requested as Jon followed him to a balcony, seeing that the Artican wanted a more private conversation. Tell me, what would the King of Artica like to discuss? Sea Lord returned to Jon while carrying a bottle of Dornish wine. After all, the Artican products had not yet been distributed at the party, as they would be later. Nothing much, Sea Lord, Jon began in a calm tone. But I would like to know about something quite peculiar. I heard that the Targaryens lived here. Jon spoke subtly, while the Sea Lord raised an eyebrow at him. Hearing this question from the King of Artica about the Targaryen siblings was a surprise for the Sea Lord, wondering what he wanted with this information. You're not thinking of, Sea Lord murmured to Jon. It's not what you're thinking, Jon said, shaking his head. But the man in front of him smiled insistently. I've heard that Daenerys Targaryen is of marriageable age. I'm sure that you, being who you are, could try to obtain the Iron Throne through your children with the Targaryen woman. The Sea Lord still spoke, rationally, while casting a bait to see if Jon had ambitions to conquer the Iron Throne. Jon wanted to laugh at him at that moment upon hearing this, since he did not need a marriage to obtain the throne. After all, that chair belonged to him by right of birth already. He did not need to marry any Targaryen for that, especially when the royal children were actually bastards in King's Landing. But Jon looked at the Sea Lord, also wanting to know more information about the Targaryen siblings, especially when the Sea Lord seemed to expect Jon to bypass his uncle Viserys. Why do you think I could obtain the throne by marrying the girl? Does her brother not have more right to the throne than she does? Jon asked curiously. Sea Lord was forced to grimace, wanting to laugh at Jon, which made the King of Artica have a displeased look at this man. I apologize for my mistake. I did not intend to offend you. Seeing Jon's face, the Sea Lord quickly apologized with his own, before continuing. Just, the girl's brother is difficult. Maybe you don't know, but he's somewhat unstable, like his father. He is truly the son of the Mad King. Sea Lord spoke as Jon looked surprised. What do you mean? Jon asked. The Sea Lord sighed before beginning to speak. Well, let me first tell you some things about him. To start, when the boy and the girl lived here, they lived with the old knight, Ser Willem Darry. He was a Targaryen loyalist until the end of his life and sheltered the children in one of his residences in this city and stayed with them, raising and training the boy to assume the throne one day. However, the knight could not live forever and ended up dying a few years ago. This caused the servants of the house to loot the place and leave the siblings to their fate, with only one belonging, their mother's crown, which he sold some time later. He spoke as Jon was surprised by this. He sold. Jon raised an eyebrow. Do you know where the crown is? He asked immediately. After all, it was the crown of his paternal grandmother. Although the Sea Lord was a bit surprised by Jon being interested in this, he nodded. One of the key holders has it after buying it from the people who bought it from Viserys. It's in his collection, and he quite flaunts it to all of us. After all, not everyone can have a queen's crown in their collection, he spoke. Jon nodded, interested. Could you tell me who it is? I would like to buy it back, if possible, he requested. The Sea Lord saw no problem in this, and said he would introduce the man for the negotiation. Now tell me more about her brother and what is wrong with him, Jon requested, returning to the conversation. Well, after they ended up living on the streets, the boy never had stable behavior, always arrogant, and worse, he couldn't control his anger. I myself wanted to beat that brat, thinking he could demand that I and the Iron Bank help him in an impossible dispute for him when he was just a child. Even with Ser Willem Darry still alive at that time, he already believed he was even the king of Braavos. It was Ser Willem Darry who saved him after he declared he would leave this palace at the time. The Sea Lord spoke, remembering that spoiled boy with disdain, before continuing. And when the boy was on the streets, the situation worsened. All those who tried to seek help from despised him. Even those who saw a chance to support the heir to the Iron Throne gave up as they saw his instability and lack of rationality of the boy, looking more like a lunatic than a king. He was known here for a long period as the Beggar King. Still, he and his sister lived in misery for a long time, but then they left the city a few years ago, the Lord of Braavos said. Jon was a bit surprised by this. He had to admit that despite the evidence of the Maesters poisoning his grandfather, he was still evil, after all that his grandfather killed the other grandfather in such a cruel way. It was strange for him to see himself in this situation, but if his uncle was like the Mad King, Jon didn't quite know what to do with that boy. After all, from what the Sea Lord had said, it would be much easier for him to try to demand something from Jon than to recognize him as his family. What should I do with him? Maybe I should first talk to him personally and see if he really is like that. As for the girl, Jon thought and looked at the Sea Lord at this moment. Is the girl also unstable like her brother? He asked. The Sea Lord shook his head this time. No, she was a sad and passive girl, even afraid of her own brother. I believe he hit her to vent his frustrations. The girl seems to have a fate very similar to that of her mother, from what I've heard. Quite sad, isn't it? He said. And if they left, do you know where they went? Jon asked, knowing he was being quite insistent on this, and the Sea Lord was not a fool. He realized that Jon had some interest in the Targaryens and smiled. Maybe I'm right, even though you don't seem to want the throne. Maybe you're interested in having a third wife. After all, Targaryen blood is quite precious, and any monarch would like to have it. The blood of the dragons and their lineage. He suggested, that's not what I'm thinking, but I would like to see them. They are in Essos, right? I intend to find them somehow. Jon was sincere. Well, since you speak that way, I will grant this information as a courtesy of Braavos. If you want to find the Targaryen siblings, they are in Pentos, the man spoke. After all, it wasn't a secret to him, and anyone with a good base of information network could find them. Even Westeros, if they wanted, could locate them. But Varys was quite manipulative in this sense, preventing any information about the Targaryens from being exposed to the king of Westeros. Thank you for all the information, Jon replied. Now, how about we continue with the banquet? The Sea Lord suggested. Of course, Jon spoke as the man smiled. It's time to sample your incredible products before we start our negotiations tomorrow, he said, while the Artican ships had already stocked a large amount of products this afternoon and were just waiting with the orders to be delivered in the middle of the hall. Jon's men quickly began to bring them, while Jon's minister made his presentation, as he always did on all trips in the middle of the place. As people continued to enjoy all the Artican products with them being released, especially the ice seeming to be a great pleasure for the warm nights of Braavos, Jon returned to his table, watching his minister of coin talking with some key holders. Satisfied with this, he returned and sat down next to Arya and Ygritte. You haven't danced even once? Jon asked with a playful look at the girl. And you think I will? Arya murmured. Then come, let's see if you're still a lady, Jon replied, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her along, while the girl let out an expression of surprise and amusement at the same time. Arya didn't mind as the two began to dance in the middle of the dance floor. The night progressed, while while the great magnates of Braavos continued to converse and sample the Artican products. Jon stayed with his family, with no important matters to deal with, but occasionally spoke to someone. His ministers, on the other hand, were busy continuing to present the products and listening to all the negotiations of interest. The banquet ended sometime later, and Jon returned to the room with his wife. The next day, Jon woke up and his gaze went to the window, seeing through the eyes of some animals, Arya fighting against a man known as the first sort of Braavos, Syrio Farrell, in a quick fight in the middle of the yard. She moves like a cat. It's amazing. She's pleasantly surprising Syrio Farrell. Syrio Farrell murmured excitedly, while he continued to attack with his sword the Valyrian steel sword of the girl in front of him, who was pleasantly skillful. I am faster than that, Arya murmured, increasing the intensity of her blows. It was only after a while that Arya ended up yielding to the man, falling to the ground exhausted. It was a great fight, girl, but Syrio Farrell is still the fastest sword in Braavos, he spoke, referring to himself in the third person. Not true, Arya exclaimed. No one can beat Jon, she declared, looking to the side, where she saw her Jon with crossed arms, watching the courtyard with many people present, while Ygritte was by his side. Why do I get the feeling your sister is pushing you into a fight? Ygritte murmured beside him. Jon wanted to laugh, but shrugged. She is, he said eventually. That sounds incredible. Syrio Farrell seemed excited about this, as his gaze also fell on Jon. I would love to see you fight like that. If possible, he commented. Jon smiled. All right then, he agreed eventually. Jon wasn't wearing armor, nor had his weapons, and didn't ask his men to bring any equipment. He just approached the courtyard. Arya, give me your sword, he requested. Without resistance, Arya handed him Dark Sister. Jon felt the weight of the sword again after some time and turned to the man. Let's begin. It will be an honor. Syrio Farrell spoke excitedly. More and more people began to gather to see the fight, including the Sea Lord and his friends, who watched with interest from one of the balconies. What happened next surprised everyone who wasn't Artican. As soon as Syrio Farrell tried to attack Jon, he quickly parried, perfectly blocking the blow and using the hilt of the sword to disarm him. Syrio Farrell's sword was flung to the side, seeing his sword falling to the ground, and the man barely had time to react before the cold blade of Dark Sister touched his neck. You are certainly fast, Syrio Farrell, Jon spoke, despite winning the fight in just a few seconds. That, Syrio Farrell barely had time to form a thought to respond to Jon's comment, which seemed more mocking than anything, as Jon withdrew the sword from the man's stunned neck and placed the sword in the ground, in front of Arya. You can keep training, Arya. I'll be going to negotiate with the Iron Bank, Jon spoke, looking at the Sea Lord, who nodded to him. Jon then left the place, while Arya flashed a mischievous smile, looking at Syrio Farrell, who was still frozen after losing so quickly, especially when he bragged so much. There will be just one more chapter in Braavos. Raccoon here. Raccoon. I deeply appreciate your support since the beginning of this exciting journey. I hope each chapter has provided incredible moments. If you like my work and would like to support the continuation of this fanfic, consider becoming a patron with plans starting at $2. As a token of gratitude, I offer access to more than 165 extra chapters with 8 active fanfics at the same time, along with other exclusive benefits on my profile, such as images and significant decisions for the stories. Even if you're not a patron, I am making chapters available a few hours earlier here, so become a free member on the platform. Glowing Star Raccoon League, Patreon Glowing Star. Visit our Patreon for more. https://www.patreon.com/Raccoon League. Extra content already available. Cyclone Naruto, Light Ninja, 20 extra chapters. Complete fanfic chapter extras for any subscription level. Pirate Flag, One Piece. I Am a Different Luffy, 30 extra chapters. Crown Game of Thrones. The Legend of Jon Arctic, 20 extra chapters. Cyclone Naruto, Minato Namikaze SI, 30 extra chapters. Dagger, The Witcher, as Uchiha Madara, 20 extra chapters. High Voltage Harry Potter, Shadow Monarch. 20 extra chapters. Crown Game of Thrones, Dragonborn. 10 extra chapters. Except for One Piece with daily chapters and Dragonborn once a week, all fanfics are updated 3 times a week. There's just a pause in updating in the week, only to create drafts for the week's chapters. In addition to the extra chapters, daily chapters are posted in 25 chapters per week. Jon returned to his room and donned more formal attire, leaving his armor on a mannequin in the room, and proceeded back to the Iron Bank, accompanied by his royal guards, the Sea Lord, and the men of Braavos. They left the palace and headed to the Iron Bank once again, returning to the room from the previous day to resume and continue the negotiations. As they settled at the table, the keyholders initiated a discussion. We discussed extensively the possibility of you becoming a shareholder in this institution since we concluded our conversation yesterday. They began. Jon listened in silence as they continued, flanked by his 2 ministers. We have come to know of your interest in establishing your own bank in Artica, which is quite surprising, yet it still leaves us doubtful about your intention to add another one to our bank as well. One of the keyholders said, looking at Jon. Jon merely smiled. I must know how to manage my money, and anyone who truly understands that diversifies it, Jon said. After all, he did not want to keep his money in just one place when he could have other alternatives for safety, which any investor would do, even trusting his life for Artica. The men acknowledged this thought, so Jon continued. And yes, I plan to create a bank for my people. I have no interest in meddling in the external economy of the kingdom at the moment. After all, my people are a priority, and I want them to get accustomed to a functional economy in Artica with the next generation already born knowing how to handle money. This is a plan where I began by educating my people enough so that now they can embark on their own businesses, Jon said. Jon spoke with a slight smile. Artica would not just be functional with him, his people would evolve on their own. That is quite surprising. A kingdom planning to become freely commercial. A keyholder complimented, showing interest in Jon's vision. Yes, Jon continued. Artica is powerful, but it doesn't have all the resources this world can offer. Therefore, we will seek progress through trade. That was the intention behind creating this trading company and my travels around the known world, Jon said. Interesting, another keyholder commented, looking towards the Sea Lord, who nodded and turned his attention back to Jon. The Sea Lord then began to give his response on behalf of the Iron Bank. We discussed extensively about your integration into the Iron Bank. However, if you deposit this amount of gold, you will become a shareholder above us. And that is bad when a foreigner has too much power. He said. Jon knew that the amount he offered would make him a prominent shareholder among all those in Braavos, which probably did not please everyone. So he nodded, though he was satisfied with the direction of this conversation. After all, everything indicated that they would accept him as one in the end, which was his initial goal. Nevertheless, are you interested in my proposal? He said with a smile to everyone at that table. Yes, we accept half of your offer. You may deposit 5 million gold dragons into the Iron Bank. One of the keyholders replied. That's good, Jon nodded. Now he could start his commercial influence on another continent. By the way, King of Artica. Another keyholder joined the conversation. We would like to request your weapons in exchange for this, he said with a greedy tone. Jon knew they would not miss the opportunity, despite being rational. After all, he was giving them gold to use as they wished and profit from it. Asking for his weapons was too much. My weapons are not negotiable. They defend my people, and I doubt that, even if I could tell you, you could produce what we do in Artica. You cannot produce our wildfire, our Elden metal, or even replicate the strength of our giants, Jon said. To start, the creation of Elden metal works with its runes, but would need magic to activate them, which happened in Artica without needing him, due to the roots of the Grand Weirwood. The same thing happened with the boxes being able to store ice, confident that no one else could replicate his trade. The wildfire was created through some substances that only Jon could create in some plants, and only the soil of Artica could make these plants grow, which made the wildfire much stronger and more stable than what the Alchemist Guild could create in Kingsland. The men seemed disheartened upon hearing this. After all, they couldn't ask for much, and their greed clearly desired Artican technology, yet Jon continued. However, this does not prevent us from becoming allies, Jon said, as the keyholders exchanged glances. An alliance between Braavos and Artica might be reasonable. They concluded, just with a look, as they always did. Creating an alliance would make both parties quite influential. However, there was still a stumbling block. As fantastic as that is, I'm not sure if a political alliance is feasible right now, as you're facing a major conflict with Westeros. The Sea Lord spoke this time. Don't get us wrong, but we like to remain neutral in this dispute. We are interested in your proposal, but the alliance would need to be formed after the conflicts in Westeros, he said on behalf of everyone present. Jon nodded in understanding. I perfectly understand. Now that the matter regarding my gold in this bank has been resolved, it's time for us to start the real negotiations, right? He said as everyone agreed. These men had already sampled all the products the night before, and as always, pleased everyone with novelties like his cigars, new drinks, and fabrics made with the help of ice spiders and dyed with colors produced from trees and plants in Artica, which made the colors even more vibrant than usual. Ice, as always, became the main asset, with these men seeing its potential, and if Jon could sell it throughout Essos, they would already be envious just thinking about the profit, especially when the resource is infinite from his lands. The negotiation was heated, with the Artican ministers participating in all of it. While Junli spoke more about the products, Gavrin did quick calculations thinking about the profit and how it would affect the national treasury of Artica. In the end, they had finalized all the contracts, and probably Braavos would be the city where Jon would have the biggest business of all. After all, the flow in this city was very large, and although Jon negotiated with the major coastal cities, other traders could distribute his items to smaller cities or even within the continent. In addition to his exclusive products, his farm items, such as food produced in Artica, and even the wood were negotiated, which got the Braavosi quite excited about this. While Jon would start supplying wood to Braavos, the North would have an impact on its economy. After all, they sold a lot of ironwood. However, this could be recuperated by rebuying food that Artica would sell to Braavos, which was much cheaper than in the South, putting an end to the commercial abuse that the Riverlands did, even with Catelyn Stark being the eldest daughter of the Tullus married to the Starks. The Riverlands never facilitated trade between the nobles there and the northern people. Even the Reach would feel the sales made to the north. It seems our negotiation has finally ended. But would you like to negotiate with Braavos, perhaps in a meeting tomorrow? I'm interested in spending my gold in this city, Jon said. After all, now was his turn to buy things from Braavos. That would be very good, Artican King. According to your record, you're interested in metals and books, right? One of the keyholders said with a greedy look. After all, he had the monopoly on metals. Yes, I would also like to hire more people to educate my people, Jon said finally. Like your contract in Dorne? One asked, and Jon nodded. Exactly. I want people who can help teach the common tongue to my people. We can prepare your order then. We will have it ready by tomorrow, they said, and Jon nodded, starting to leave the Iron Bank with his men. In the end, everyone left the Iron Bank satisfied, while Jon returned to the Sea Lord's palace. He would stay a few more days. So, he spent that day enjoying a bit of the locale with his wife and talking continuously with the Sea Lord about various topics. I would like to buy a sword from you, like you did with Lord Tywin Lannister. He eventually broached a topic that Jon had dealt with the Lannisters in Westeros. I can sell a sword made of Elden metal. No problem, Jon said with a calm tone. That's great. It's a pity you aren't interested in selling the Valyrian steel ones, right? He asked, and Jon immediately denied. My two swords and the Dark Sister are not for sale, Jon said. Understand. Still, I want one made of Elden metal, he said, and Jon nodded. They continued talking while the man seemed interested in purchasing a few more things from Jon, but he would leave that for tomorrow, especially regarding the proposal to sell some of his ships. At one point, the Sea Lord expressed his interest in Artica. You know, I have a son who is 8 named days old. He mentioned, referring to his heir. Yes, he seems like a strong boy, Jon replied, unable to help but remember when he was 8 years old. It hadn't been a very pleasant childhood in Winterfell. I was thinking, the Sea Lord continued, but I took the liberty of speaking with your ministers and even your men about education in Artica. From what I've seen, your ministers were educated in the highest positions, and the guards and soldiers are being educated. I'm impressed by your reasoning. I am tempted to have my son educated in Artica, if you would allow it. He said. Jon heard this, knowing that proposals like this could arise after seeing the results of education at Artica's university. I wouldn't see a problem with that, and although we haven't opened up to the world yet, we can talk about it. Maybe in 2 or 3 years, if you're still interested, you could visit the city. It should please you. I'll let your son study there, Jon said. That's very good. The man spoke at the end with a small smile. They continued talking for a while longer, and the next day, Jon returned to the Iron Bank, where scrolls about all sorts of things were laid out in front of him, which he could read along with his ministers as they studied everything there. After all, they needed to start buying those things. Let's begin, Jon declared as all 12 key holders, along with the Sea Lord, waited to start the discussion. In the end, 5 hours of negotiation took place, while various Braavosi men had to come at this time as they marked everything Jon negotiated to start loading onto the Artican ships. In the end, they bought tens of tons of steel and iron, thousands of new desert-bred horses, many of which even the Dothraki cows demanded as mounts, plus 20,000 breeding animals, which would be removed from outside the city, in pastures in the mountainous region. 100,000 books taken from the city, with an interview for more than 10,000 lecturers for the Common Tongue and Valyrian, under the same contract they had with other teachers in Artica, taken from Dorne. We are very pleased with such a sale. The men murmured satisfied, seeing millions of gold coins entering the city through the sales. That's good. Artica is happy to acquire all these items. Anyway, I would now like to negotiate with one of the key holders. Jon spoke, looking at one of them specifically. Yes, the Sea Lord mentioned your interest in one of his items. I usually wouldn't sell that crown, but you have something I'm very interested in. He spoke at the end, and a small negotiation began. In the end, Jon won 10 Artican carracks in exchange for his grandmother's crown. This item was exclusive and could be obtained from his carracks, extremely fast ships. Jon even refused to win them in the end to keep them even more exclusive and trade for the crown. With everything ready, they returned to the Sea Lord's palace once more. Jon asked for some Articans to stay at various points in the city to interview potential teachers, and even some artisans hired to teach a few things to the Artican people as well. At night, there was another banquet to celebrate the commercial partnership with more products from Artica. It was only the next day that they began their preparations to finally depart for Braavos. Meanwhile, ships began to leave the fleet at this time, as the Braavosi people prepared to start collecting all the resources sold to the Articans and leave them at the ports for collection. The main port was not used, but various points around the city began to fill up with ships from Artica. Things were much calmer now, seeing that Artica posed no danger. Among these ships that left the fleet, 10 of them ended up circling the city until reaching the Iron Bank, where there was high security to receive them. 5 million gold coins began to be unloaded, while many high-ranking bank officials counted the bags to verify everything was correct. The ships continued collecting animals, metals, books, and people for half a day, while other ships approached the Seastone Palace, as there was a need to store a huge stock to supply the city during this initial movement, with 50 ships full of stock to deposit in the city. So, you want to do it here? Jon asked in the solar of the Lord of Braavos, as they looked at a map spread out on the table. Yes, I believe that will be the best choice, the Sea Lord said while Jon thoughtfully gazed at that spot. Their contract did not include a large port like Jon had managed in Dorne, but they had certainly managed to negotiate a giant depot to store their products while their ships arrived in the city. The route between Braavos and Artica was good, despite still having to travel half the distance of Westeros. Artica was remote from all places in the end. Here, I can authorize your construction, King of Artica, the Sea Lord finally said, and Jon nodded. All right, we will do it this way, Jon nodded at the end. They began to say their goodbyes, with Jon stating he would visit Braavos in the near future to finalize his contract, and started to prepare for travel, while finding Ygritte and Arya waiting for him. Let's go, Jon said at the end, and they nodded, beginning to store things on the ships that were already alongside the palace. As everyone began to board, Arya looked aside, unable to see Jon, and followed her gaze to another ship, where Jon was with some of his guards. "What is he doing?" Arya exclaimed, slightly bewildered. "Jon said he would sort some things out. So let's wait for him in the fleet," Ygritte said as the main ship began to move along with others to the west side of the city, while Jon's ship departed to the east and went down to the south, approaching the city center from that side of the waters. "So it's here," Jon murmured, looking at the enormous structure in front of him, as the ship approached, docking at one of the small ports, while Jon felt the massive door of the place opening at that moment with a man coming out and standing at the entrance as if he had been waiting for him. "It seems we have some reception," Jon murmured and walked out of the ship with his guards. They approached the man, who was a middle-aged man with a calm look waiting for Jon to approach. "So this is the House of Black and White?" Jon asked, looking at the large building. "You are correct, but that's not what concerns you. Is it Son of the Dragon?" the man said mysteriously. Jon was a bit surprised by this, but kept his face serious. "No, I am confident that I and my family would fare well against you. But what concerns me is my people. After all, assassination is not justifiable against the Articans." Jon replied, "He could protect himself, his wives, and children. After all, there's an army of animals for these assassins to get past first. Even if they could change voice and face, animals have better instincts and would be killed just for approaching. But his people were different, and he was not hypocritical enough to say that his people would never die. There would be conflicts, and many would fall with that, but he would not accept assassinations against them, knowing how both his conflict and even the trade he was creating could attract people who would seek retaliation against them and might opt with the faceless men." Jon looked at the man again and continued speaking. "I just want to know if you could be hired to kill some of mine," Jon asked. "Articans are certainly more expensive than ordinary people. We know this might draw your ire, but still, it's a negotiable price. If the god accepts the contract, it will be done," the man said with his neutral tone. "I see. Then tell your god," Jon said in a serious tone. "If any of you touch my people, I will come here, burn down this entire place, and kill all of you. I don't care what your god thinks of this." Hearing these words, the man showed no change in his face. There was no anger, surprise, or fear. He just kept looking at Jon calmly. "Understand," was all he said. Seeing this, Jon shrugged. "Let's go," he finally said, heading back to the ship there. It didn't take long for him to circle the city, finally heading towards the Titan, passing under its legs, and finally returning to his fleet, preparing to continue his journey south. Then he would move on to the next commercial objective.